Nice to see you. You are Mr. Mark is from Washington, D.C.
There you go. Hi,
Yeah.
Mark. How are you? Mateo.
Hi, good.
Hello, Mark.
Hi, great. I like all those books in your background. It looks very legal.
I'm going to mute myself for a second.
Okay, that's fine. I like all those books in your background.
I'm very impressed you're wearing a coat and tie, Mark.
Well, nobody told me. I'm happy to lose it.
Yeah.
Well, I was on a similar panel a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't have a tie on. Everybody else did. Fortunately, I had one on the back of my door.
Well, you know what? I'm in Athens, so nobody wears any coats or ties here.
I love Athens. That's great.
Yeah.
That's good. Are you in a hotel or are you in a just staying somewhere?
No, I'm in a hotel room. My wife's gone out with the credit card.
Of course. You got to help the economy.
We were out having a cup of coffee and she told me that she forgot to bring her credit cards out. I said that was a shame.
Peter, I just sent you those questions, so you should be getting them.
Thank you.
Mark, did you receive the questionnaires? It was in the group and I have shared on an email as well.
The one that begins with policymakers panel.
Yeah.
Yes. So you are in the first panel, Mark. So there are 3 people in first panel. One is the Yo and Rohan Shah from Mumbai, and Mr. Kamlesh Varshney from Delhi is the representing of the Government of India. Mr. Varshney is Joint Secretary in Ministry of Finance. And this panel 1 will be moderated by Mr. Shailendra Kumar, who is the founder and editor of Tax India Online, a 20-year-old fiscal media firm, one and only registered firm in India with the press bureau.
Okay, great.
So Mr. Shailendra will be the moderator. So as a process, like 6:30, I will start with the introduction of the purpose of organizing this event for 10 minutes. And then I will hand over the panel after introducing Mr. Shailendra for the first panel. And then panel 2nd will be moderated by me. Panel 3rd will be moderated by Mateo. So this is how we are going to be, design this entire, 3 hours journey. And we have got 1,464 registration across 173 locations, unique locations across world. So, and this event is also going to be live on YouTube, and so that people who have not registered, probably they can also see from YouTube. And generally, this is a webinar, so we will not have any interruption from the attendees. So we can talk freely, and panel by panel we can talk, and questions will come directly in the Q&A box, which will be visible to all the panelists. So that during the open house, these questions can be answered, or even without open house also, you can deal with the questions. So there is no restriction that the question will be taken up. So moderator will pick the questions appropriately and then direct it to the panelists. So these are the basic hygienes I thought let me share with you all. And the panel profile will be read out by the moderator. So every moderator will read out the panel profile, and the presentation will be shared by me at the time of the panel start, so that all the attendees can see on YouTube that who are the panelists, what they have done. So that profile with their pictures will be displayed on the screen. Oops. Is that okay? So
yeah, that's right. Rishabh, is there anybody from the OECD in attendance?
No, we didn't manage to get anyone.
In the registration, we have a couple of people who have registered as a attendee, not in the panel.
No, okay. No, I mean in attendees.
Yeah, yes, it is there. OECD attendees are there. People from IBFD is also there. couple of government people from UK, HMRC have also registered. And
Okay.
the Indian government, a lot of people have registered from India as well.
Okay, so
A
it's
lot of
good for me to know.
family offices
for me.
have registered.
It's just good for me to know roughly who's there when I frame my comments.
How aggressive you're going to be, Peter?
How?
to basically kind of gauge how aggressive you're going to be?
No, not at all. It's just that, you know, we need to be as straight up and down as we can be on things like this.
Yeah, I agree.
How long is each panel? Is it the same length of time?
It's about 50 minutes each one. So yeah.
1-5 or 5-0?
5-0. So we'll have basically 35 minutes to 40 minutes to kind of cover the questions that we have, and then we'll just open it up to questions. Or I will, in my case, I have only 4 questions, so we'll try to get through those fairly quickly, and then I'll basically just work in all the questions that we get from the audience members. I know Rishabh's panel has a lot more questions, so he might do some things a little
I have
bit
2
differently.
issues to deal with. One is the technology, and other one is the service provider view. So the policy panel will talk about, the first panel is a policy panel. It will talk about the policy framework across the countries. I will just give in my introduction, I'll just give a brief idea about how 88 countries, out of 88 countries, 60-70 countries have already framed the law around indirect tax to tax the digital economy. Similarly, some 40 countries, 30 countries have already started enacting the law in direct tax also. So that is a brief overview I'll start, but policy panel will deal with the various balanced approach in terms of policy, that how the policies are being framed worldwide, their experience. And similarly, the panel industry, which Mateo is going to drive, wherein he will talk about the industry view, that how industry is taking it up. Because after COVID, I'll share some statistics also that after COVID, how bigger the digital economy has become. So I will share some July data. I have got the latest data now from Hootsuite and also from a couple of big 4. So I have just combined a small presentation of 10 minutes, which I will start at 6:30, from 6:30 to 6:40, which is India time. So sorry, because we are in different time zone. So the first 10 minutes, I'll take it up.
It's like an introduction, basically.
Are the panels running concurrently or successively?
Successively.
So when I'm finished with the first panel, do I drop off? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah. If you want to stick around, Mark, you're more than welcome to. But I mean, once you're done with your panel, if you need to go.
Well, at the end, we are going to have a larger discussion wherein all the panelists will be taking up the question, open house. So if you want to be part of the entire discussion, most welcome. Many panelists have desired that they want to be the part of the entire all the 3 panels. So we are quite open for that. So
yeah, it's flexible. So I mean, if you guys want to stick around for the 2.5 hours, that's great. But I mean, if you have other things to do, yeah, I mean, just stick around for your panel. And we understand all of you are very busy, right? It depends on your schedule. So
yeah. So Mateo, when are we actually starting?
Yours, Peter, I sent you the email with this exact starting time. Yours starts at, I have India time here. Let me see what the UK time is, at least, or Cyprus time.
Is Cyprus the same as Athens time?
Yeah, it's the same exact time. Let me see. I'll tell you right now, Peter. Yeah, because if you want to log on again later when the panel is about to start.
Yeah.
Our panel is the last one. It starts at 2:50. It's scheduled to start at 2:50 p.m. UK time, which would be
4:50 Athens time.
4:50 Athens time. So you can log on maybe 5 minutes before that. That's great.
Okay. And what time is it now?
Right now it's 2:45.
Okay, so I've got a little while to go back and earn a living for a little longer.
Yeah, so basically we're gonna start our specific panel in 2 hours.
Okay, all right.
Marx is the first one right after Rishabh that does the introduction. So
okay, so I can leave now and dial back in at that time that you suggested. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're busy right now, Peter, yeah, go ahead and.
Yeah, I am.
log off and join us later.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent.
Nice to meet you, Mark.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you,
well,
Dr. Peter.
We'll talk,
I'll
Peter.
talk to you a bit later, Rishabh.
Yeah. Excellent.
So anyone from Matthew from your team will be joining as an attendee. Is there any, because I'm not sure whether in webinar, do we need to do anything or attendee can directly get into it? So do we need to admit them or something like that?
No, not if the settings are set.
Okay.
They might just, I mean, it depends on what settings, but they might need a password to enter. But if there is no password required, they should basically, as soon as you go live on the webinar, as soon as you go live on the webinar here on Zoom and it starts, it should get going.
Okay.
So right now you're in practice. We're in practice mode, right?
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Tarun. So Tarun Gulati has joined from Delhi. He's a senior counsel.
Hello, Mr. Gulati.
Well, he's got a tie on, so there's two of us.
There'll be a few people with ties. I opted for no tie this time around.
So Matthew, I think we are live now, if I'm not wrong, because this is not a practice session.
Oh, we are live. Okay, yeah. People are hearing us. My colleague just said that she can see and hear us. So
yeah, but my colleague also says that they can listen to us. So good, they can listen the making of Global Taxation Summit.
How many people are in the first panel? It's four people. It's
yeah. First panel has got 3 panel experts and 1 moderator, Mr. Shailendra Kumar from Tax India Online.
Mm-hmm.
So when the first panel will start, we all will put our video on off mode so that the spotlight will be on the first 4 panelists. So
yes. I will mute myself and shut the video down.
So I'm making you co-host because so that you can also monitor. So I'm making you. I've already made you co-host.
Okay, excellent.
So in the meantime, for the benefit of the early people who have joined, so it will be an opportunity for them to talk to each other. So Tarun, Mr. Mark is from Washington, DC. He is the Vice Chairman of Morrison KSI. And Mr. Tarun Gulati is the Senior Counsel at Tax Litigation Practice. Earlier, he was senior partner with PDS Legal. And now he's practicing as a Senior Counsel, a designated Senior Counsel. So vast experience, and you guys can chat one-to-one or whatever way. I think I will try to introduce your vast profile in whatever way we can, but your experience and expertise are quite great. So welcome, and I'm very happy that this issue of digital economy taxation we are bringing on the forefront. And now other panelists are joining.
There you go.
Good evening, Mr. Kamlesh, Varshney. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to everyone.
Yeah,
nice to see you.
Welcome to the panel conference, and good evening, Mr. Rohan Shah from Mumbai. So we have our panel 1 ready, friends, those who are watching live and those who are attending now. 6:30 is the time we will start. And after a brief introduction, 10 minutes from now, after a brief introduction, 20 minutes from now, the panel 1 will proceed, which will be moderated by Mr. Shailendra Kumar of Tax India Online. So thank you for joining all the distinguished esteemed panelists we have. Panel 1 is on policy. Friends, we all know that digital economy has grown leaps and bounds, and it has become almost a new normal, or I will say completely 6 years leapfrogging of the entire digital ecosystem, which we were expecting to, completely by 2025. We are experiencing it now in 2020 post-COVID. So some of the statistics detail I am going to share with you in the introduction. But before that, as a general, I will introduce all the panelists, and that will be done by the moderator. There are 3 panel. For the benefit of all the panelists, I'm just sharing this, that all the 3 panel will go on a sequence. The panel 1 is on policy, panel 2 is on technology and service providers view on digital economy taxation, and panel 3 is on industry view. Panel 3 will be taken care by my friend Mr. Mateo Jarrin, Cuvi, who is heading the Taxlinked as a content head, and he's vast knowledge of global taxation systems is handling, and I'm sure every day he's handling a lot of exciting summits, and this summit is with India, and I'm really thankful that he has collaborated and we are doing this. More than 173 unique locations we have got registration from. This is also, we all are connected without any, I would say that no flying, no movement from one city to another city, and we all are together on a virtually. Mr. Mark Baran is from Washington, DC. He is vice chairman from Morrison KSI, world's 3rd largest network of tax and legal professionals. Mr. Rohan Shah from Mumbai. Mr. Tarun Gulati from Delhi. Mr. Sri Kamlesh Varshney representing Government of India from Delhi. So really excited, and I'm sure that all participants will get the benefit of this distinguished panel, as well as in the participant also. I would like to tell you that digital companies like Oracle, Apple, Google, we have participations from all these companies. So friends, this is a beginning, and we all know that digital economy, we have to handle it digitally. So there are a lot of development which are being shared, which will be shared during the process by our panelists. So stay tuned. The event, attending the event, how you can benefit it yourself more is by active participation. There are surveys, there are polls, then you will have a question answer. You can directly ask your question to the panelist, which will be picked up by the moderator. You can ask your question in the chat box also if you want to interact within yourself. If the participant want to interact within themselves, they can use the chat box facility. Keep your digital business card ready, exchange it, take this opportunity to network. I'm thankful for the organizers, Taxlinked, Tax India Online, BizStreet and GST Street. On behalf of all the organizers, I welcome you all. And in next 7 minutes from now, we are going to start. So stay tuned. All the panelists are right now available to you. Take this opportunity, ask your questions, clarifications, and also share your thought about this digital economy, how it is going to be taxed worldwide, both from direct tax and indirect tax perspective. There are certain facts and figures which are available post-COVID. We have collected, compiled for you. We are going to share that in the 10-minute presentation as an opening presentation. After that, the panelists will take you through the respective subjects. So without taking much of the time, one thing I would say that you are going to get the benefit of this distinguished panel because the subject is new. The industry is also new. Last 20 years, the industry has seen a complete different vertical of growth. And in last 6 months, the growth has been in 2-digit, or in some country, it has seen 3-digit growth also. For example, education, healthcare, entertainment, every industry has seen the growth of digital economy because everything has gone digital. There is no choice. I wish you all are staying safe and taking all the precautions to safeguard yourself, your family, and I'm sure very soon the world will find the solution of COVID-19, and we all will be meeting in the conferences and the webinars and the seminars as before. But till then, this is in time when the world has become a little smaller. I will hand over to Mateo just to share his experience of, because we have 2-3 more minutes to start. So Mateo, you would like to tell why this idea of digital economy taxation and global taxation summit came, and why we are together making this. What is the ethos behind organizing this?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Rishabh and TIOL and all the folks at BizStreet and GST for reaching out to us and proposing this collaboration and organizing this, I guess, international online gathering of experts on digital taxation, international taxation, and whatnot. As Taxlinked, just to give you a little background, those of you who are listening, to give you kind of little information on who we are. We're an international network for tax and law professionals. We have close to 1,500 members in more than 120 jurisdictions. And we basically provide all sorts of networking facilities. We organize webinars, we organize conferences. We've hosted 2 conferences, and we were going to do that on a yearly basis, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to cancel those plans. So basically, we're very involved in working with accountants and tax lawyers and corporate lawyers and the wealth managers in kind of dealing with all the issues that they have and providing them with networking opportunities and whatnot. So it was a natural, I guess. It was an obvious thing for us to connect with Rishabh and the organizations in India to kind of organize this, to provide kind of a global perspective on with heavy focus on India, given that it is one of the largest economies in the world, and the digital presence in that country has expanded exponentially. So it made sense for us to kind of approach it and organize this webinar with you guys. So thank you for that. Also want to thank the panelists for taking the time out of their very busy days to be with us for 50 minutes or 2.5 hours if you can, and discuss these issues with us. It is an exciting time. The OECD a few weeks ago released their draft proposal for the taxation of digital economy. I know the United Nations is also working on it and has released some proposals. So there's a lot going on in the field. It is one of the hottest issues in international tax that we've approached or have seen in the past 2 to 3 years. So, and this is going to continue being one of the most important issues, considering COVID and considering the huge success for a lot of digital businesses and the online presence of these businesses with the pandemic. So we're excited. I know Pillars 1 and Pillars 2 are controversial. I know the American people, the Americans on this panel will have a lot to say about the US and their participation or lack thereof in the OECD's draft proposals. So it'll be an interesting discussion, I think, and we'll have different perspectives. Coming from India, coming from the United States, coming from Dubai with Peter Wilson. So I'm excited about this and just want to thank everyone for being here. And we'll be starting in a couple of minutes, so I'll hand it over back to Rishabh, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Mateo. So we are just 2 minutes away. So let me just start the screen share so that I can be ready with that. So I hope my screen is visible to panelists as well. Is it visible?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah. So friends, first of all, let me say a good evening and good morning both together and good afternoon, because this is the global summit and we are starting our global summit with the Welcome interest. We from the organizing team of Taxlinked, BizStreet, GSTN, and Tax India Online welcome all the distinguished expert panelists, industry and government participants, researchers and consultants and lawyers who are in this webinar or watching on YouTube channel. Digital economy, as we all know, is going to grow by leaps and bounds in near future and in both financial and commercial terms. So it's important for us to get the certainty in taxation, be it indirect or direct tax, for borderless and humanless transactions happening in digital ecosystem every nanosecond. All country or majority of them believes in consensus building, but it is quite a challenging task. In next 5 to 6 minutes, I will show you some facts and figures considering post-COVID scenario and current status of direct and indirect tax regulation country by country with respect to digital economy taxation, and it will certainly help the participant in understanding the magnitude and importance of the subject. We have 3 panels comprising of policymakers, technology and service provider, and industry view. Distinguished panelists are with you. Each panel will have interactive Q&A inbuilt, so feel free to shoot your questions in the Q&A box for a specific panelist or all the panelists. Choice is yours. Do participate in polls and surveys, and do not forget to grow your network beyond your country jurisdiction by sharing your digital business card, what you do and interested in doing, so that the post this webinar, you will have more new friends from the fraternity. Thank you once again for joining this mini global summit. To all our esteemed panelists, we promise to provide you more such opportunities in future of collaboration between multiple countries. And thanks to Mr. Shailendra Kumar and Mr. Mateo Jarrin Cuvi for their tremendous support and collaboration to make this Global Taxation Summit a successful beginning. 3 panel and 3 moderators, and these are the experts you are going to be listening to them today in 3 panel. So they are all global panel experts, authority in their own field, and they are going to share. But before that, let me share the global overview. Yeah, Shailendra, I have started already. Please join me. Yeah, please. Yeah, panel link. So, global overview of digital ecosystem. Digital around the world. In July 2020, this is the data that around the world, 7.79 billion people, which include 56 of urban people, out of which 4.57 billion people are using actively internet and 3.96 billion people are active social media users. The daily time spent with the media is 6 hours 42 minutes on internet, which includes 2 hours 22 minutes on social media. During the COVID, people have generated a habit of spending more time with devices, and this habit is continue to grow even beyond COVID-19. So which means people are going to use smart speakers, smart watches, gaming consoles, and laptop and mobile phone more than before. Let me tell you how we browse the web traffic is 2 clear leaders, Chrome and Safari. And the next one is Firefox. So in the process, we are going to see the global e-commerce going to grow. If you see the slide, 81% people search online for their product and services. 90% people visit online retail site or store to buy any goods or services. 67% people love to shop using a tablet or a mobile phone. And 52% people on this, between the age group of 16 to 64 worldwide, have purchased some product via mobile phone. Now the perspective of mobile users versus mobile connection worldwide, if you see, there are 2 data sets available. The GSMA intelligence data says that out of 7.94 billion people on this planet Earth, 5.15 people total number are unique individuals having mobile phone. Similarly, the Ericsson Mobility Report data says that this number is 6.03 billion. Whatever the number is, but the global mobile connectivity has grown during the COVID time. And this evolution you can see from 2014 to the Q1 of 2020. Now the monthly average mobile data used by an average smartphone user worldwide is 8.4 GB, which is quite high. And if you see this billions of gigabytes which is called exabytes, are generated every quarter. Now come to the platforms. Platforms have become a very big platform catering to the whole demand of the internet as well as e-commerce, gaming, etc. So you see 2 billion people logged in every month into YouTube, and total number of hours watched on YouTube every day is 1 billion hours. 45 and 55 is the ratio of male and female. So all this data is available publicly. I'm just bringing this data to you just to tell you the importance of the subject and magnitude of the digital economy. Facebook says that 2.09 billion people can be reached out by them through advertisement. And video conferencing platform, we are right now connected with Zoom. 300 million participants per day are connected with Zoom, wherein if you see Cisco WebEx, 500 million per month. So this is the power of digital economy connecting all of us. Similarly, social media use have increased, and if you can see that 82% people, they go on social media, broadcast is 30%. So there is a big shift, a paradigm shift happening in digital economy worldwide. So whether it's an active social media user or social media usage versus the total population, in this graph, if you in this map of world, you will find that the social media use versus total population, regardless of the age, there are active social media users, and this has gone up during the COVID time. The mostly used 4 platform worldwide is Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, and Facebook Messenger. This is the updated data up to 16 July 2020. During the COVID time, the countries which have gone beyond the world average are Philippines, India, South Africa, Brazil, Poland, Romania, where the growth of active social media user is above the world average of 43%. Philippines have registered 64% growth. India has registered 59% growth. And the enduring use of video conferencing has also gone up, and India leads in that, which is 46%, which is much beyond the world average of 27%. Enduring use of video calling. Similarly, the medical app download, the entire medical industry is now getting digital, not by default, but not by choice, but by force or by default, by design. They were designed to go this kind of growth by 2025, but it has been leapfrogged. Similarly, education industry, you see the worldwide average is 90% growth, wherein some of the countries like Australia, United States, Brazil, and India, Spain, China, they all have garnered 3-digit growth in education, online education. So digital economy taxation has become a very important subject, and today we are going to deal with it with 3 panel with us, all the experts. So out of 46 countries, a latest KPMG report says that direct taxes, 23 legislation has been, in 23 countries, legislation has been enacted. 4 draft legislations are up for public consultation. 9 public announcements are intention to implement. So a lot of things are happening country by country, even in indirect tax also. Like 88 countries, you will see 78 legislation have been enacted, and 10 draft legislation are available in public. So to proceed with the panel 1 discussion now, let me introduce Mr. Shailendra Kumar, our Tax India Online founder editor. So before that, let me give a brief introduction of Mr. Shailendra Kumar, founder and editor at TIOL India. He is a person with all the qualities of a good journalist: bold, fearless, truthful speaker, straight talker, and ruthless when the need arises. He has also showcased his entrepreneurship, building the TIOL from the ground, and it has already completed a journey of 20 years. To celebrate the journey, he has started a TIOL award, and that award is to award all the stakeholders in taxation space, which includes taxpayers, tax collectors, tax advisors, tax technologists, and media. So without taking much of your time, I now invite Mr. Shailendra Kumar to basically start the proceeding of the panel. We have Mr. R. Sridhar, also, so I welcome Mr. R. Sridhar in the panel. So Mr. Shailendra Kumar, over to you, sir. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's done. So good evening to all the distinguished speakers and participants from more than 173 unique geographical coordinates in the global map. So friends, all of us are witness to a very rapid digitalization of every aspect of human life. The digitalized component of the global economy has grown many folds in the past 1 decade. We have seen as from the presentation made by Mr. Rishabh, how it has further grown during the COVID time. Every stakeholder, such as investor, consumer, tech companies, have profited from this phenomenon, except the revenue authorities across the world. And it has become such a serious bone of geopolitical contention across the world. The OECD was tasked. Yes. The OECD was tasked by the G20 to work out some sort of acceptable model for digital taxation. But even after 7 years of very rigorous and sincere homework, consensus looks distant and fractious. The OECD has announced that by middle of the 2021, a consensus may emerge on the horizon. Meanwhile, there is a virtual rush among a large number of tax jurisdictions to impose digital service tax as they appear to be running out of patience. Let me go to the first speaker, Mr. Kamlesh Varshney. So India has introduced utilization levy as a stopgap arrangement. Do you think that India would also go for digital tax if the OECD fails to arrive at any meaningful solution by the middle of 2021?
Thank you, Shailendra, and thank you everyone for giving this opportunity to share our views. Shailendra, your question is difficult to answer because what India would do, probably it's not contemplated at this point of time because we are hopeful that we are going to get a consensus in the inclusive framework. A lot of progress has been made by 137 countries who are part of inclusive framework. But yes, there are many open questions. If you see the blueprint which has been released by OECD last week or about 14 days back, there are a lot of open questions. But we are confident, and India is making all efforts to ensure that consensus is arrived, because we are fully aware of the fact that it is only multilateral consensus solution which could be a very effective way of taxing digital economy. And what will happen if that consensus is not arrived at? That question probably is not possible to answer at this point of time. Thank you.
Right, sir. So let me maybe it will be difficult, from any speaker from the government side to talk about the mind of the government at this stage. Yes, but let me go to Mr. Mark. Maybe he would like to throw some light, on what happened, what transpired at the OECD, and why this kind of talk. A lot of expectations were there, prior to this, and EU was particularly hammering this point. If the OECD fails this time, then the EU perhaps would like to go ahead, with the digital tax, etc. So what happened? Maybe you could throw some light on this deliberations.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure being here as well. I will tell you this. I know what you know and others that's publicly known about what occurred during these negotiations, and I will tell you this. There's a bit of drama. There's a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of other logistical issues, and there's quite a bit at stake, including the fact that we're in the middle of an election here in the United States in a sharply divided nation. So what happened is a result of what might happen as well in the future. I cannot predict. It's only speculation as to how the US will respond going forward. I think we're going to get to that later. But what happened was that the OECD has worked diligently and produced a document, and it's a Herculean effort, I might add, and they should be applauded. Finding consensus among close to 140 nations and jurisdictions is a monumental task And given the fact that nations such as the United States looks after our tax base and our economic forecasts, and we have our own process, and then managing so many other nations with similar budget and fiscal issues, I'm surprised actually that it has moved this far. So that's how I'm going to comment as to what happened. I know that was your question, but what could happen in the future, I think, is what's more important.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mark. Let me go to Mr. Rohan Shah. Sir, in fact, you being a very keen interpreter and a person who specializes in watching all these events from very close quarters, and also, coming out with very, interesting analysis of, what happened and what are the possibilities in the coming months, and whether developing countries' interests are going to be protected, because the US is literally at a tangent with the EU and various other countries. And naturally, for US has to protect its own tax base, and they have to look after the interests of their own, the large, the tech firms, which is globally known as GAFA. So the GAFA particularly. So how do you look at it, sir? The whole issue.
Shailendra, thank you firstly for this opportunity. And let me begin, really in the context of probably a more generic and quite simple issue that, if we look at the world and we see that tax is a necessity, then in the world, we have a section of businesses and population who cannot be taxed because their incomes are too low. And then we have a section of entities and population who have extremely high incomes. They are the highest profit generating enterprises. And then we have the mid-tier enterprises who generate profit. Now, your taxpayers are only going to come from the high profit generators or the mid-tier tax generators. But the reality of it is the bottom layer is non-taxable. The top layer pays minimal tax. So the entirety of the burden is then, in a way, borne by moderately profitable businesses. Now, in any architecture, social or economic, this is a recipe for disaster. Unless those who earn the greatest profits pay their fair share of profits, we are really setting ourselves up in a very simplistic way for quite significant disruptions in the global economy and in the global order. So that was sort of one thought I wanted to share. The second is that I fully endorse what has been said by both my co-panelists, Mr. Varshney, when he said that we do hope we reach consensus, and Mark when he says that a tremendous amount of work, monumental work has been put in to create what has been created by OECD. At the same time, if I reflect with one or two other forums that I have some familiarity with, and let's look at consensual forums in a global economic order, WTO, and then let's look at what has happened with environment. In the WTO, we were a 143 nation consensual forum. And the fact that recurrently over the last 9 years, we cannot achieve consensus on any situation has really meant that WTO has become the white elephant, whereas regional trading arrangements, multilateral trading arrangements have actually taken over the whole global trading order. Likewise, in the context of environment, we got to some phase of consensus. We got to some protocols which were consensual. And now we are in a phase of complete disruption because local political needs and local economic needs of each nation have taken over the consensus format. And I think even as we look at what is happening now at the OECD, I do believe there is great need for a global order. And that consistency of enactment and legislation can only help all of us. But I fear that given the acute anxieties that most nations have about looking after their jobs, about providing employment, I don't think consensus is going to be easy. And if consensus eludes us, then individual nations take over their own legislative framework. And once that happens, you are going to be able to tax, but you are not going to be able to tax to a uniform format or legislative framework. And while I do hope there will be consensus, whatever I've seen at WTO and in the environmental protocols, this consensus is going to be very, very, very hard to achieve.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let me go back to Mr. Varshney, sir. I mean, what was your initial take on the whole issue? In fact, the whole gamut of contentious issues which have emerged, and the fact that OECD has really done tremendous amount of work, a lot of time has gone into it, a lot of consensus also so far as developing countries are concerned, and only a couple of tax jurisdictions have little different views on the whole issue, and probably that delayed it. So how do you look at, sir, the entire basket of issues?
Shailendra, I think if we look at the blueprint that OECD has released recently, you are absolutely right, and my co-panelists have also touched upon this. This clearly shows the amount of work that has undergone, and we must compliment OECD Secretariat and all of the countries, because there are a lot of consensus have been arrived at, and there are still open issues, and there are issues which are very significant. I will just try to explain them. And while trying to do that, it is also appropriate to look at what UN has suggested, but we must be very clear that UN has started his work right now, while OECD is doing work for last many years, and therefore OECD work is at a very matured stage, while UN work is at a very starting stage. And the second very important difference between two work is that UN is not government bodies. So the committee which is there, it is committee of experts where individuals represent themselves, they don't represent a country. So any solution which is suggested by UN committee of expert may not have the backing of their countries, and therefore inclusive framework is a better place where if consensus is reached, that is going to be implemented by all the countries. So these are the basic difference. But why I have brought UN here in the picture, because there is something which UN has suggested, which probably could influence OECD work. Although, as I said earlier, that UN work is at a very initial stage. So many people, when they say that OECD work is quite complex, while UN suggestion is a very simple solution, I probably will not agree to that because OECD work is complex because they have done a lot of work. Now, if you look at UN proposal, they still have to carry out that work which OECD has already carried out. Their first suggestion is gross basis of taxation. Now, gross basis of taxation is something we find it difficult for countries and businesses to accept. Those discussions also took place in the inclusive framework. But then there is another practical problem in UN proposal. How do you implement gross basis of taxation, withholding tax on gross basis? How do you implement that? Because most of digital economy is consumer based. It is business to consumer. It is not B2B, it is B2C, most of them. How do you expect a consumer to withhold taxes while making payment to a digital company? These are the issues where UN still have to work, and we will see how they come out with a solution. That is something which is going to become a complex issue. And then when UN talk about net profit taxation, also giving an option to the digital company to get tax on net profit basis, this is where it will get very close to OECD recommendations, which is net profit based. And that is where the more complex complications will start. Because what tax base you will take for calculating net profit margin, whether you go with profit before tax, whether you go for gap, and whether you go for book profit or tax profit, if you go for book profit, what tax adjustment you make, so all this, and how do you source the revenue? Because in digital taxation, this is a very important point, that if I am watching an ad which is produced by some other country, and paid by some other country, whether that revenue should go to those countries or whether revenue should come to India. OECD has done a tremendous work on this sourcing rule. UN still have to do. So once you go for net basis of taxation and even for gross basis taxation, this sourcing will have to work, still have to be done. So what I'm trying to say is that some of the complication which is in OECD model is natural. Once you try to bring out a proposal which is not going to create a problem, which is going to be acceptable to everyone, which is very clear does not lead to litigation, then probably you have to come out with all these steps which OECD has rightly come out with, and therefore it has become complicated. But why I brought this issue here is that there is something which is very significant in UN proposal, and that is when that suggested net basis of taxation, they have given just one number, that they, let's say 30%. I mean, this number could be anything, but let's say the number that they have given is that 30%. If MNC has a revenue from India of 100 rupees, then straight away you say that 30 rupees is basically because of the value that he is driving from India. And that on that you apply the net profit margin of the MNCs. So that is a very simple proposal. Now the question is, I mean, something I want to draw it here. In contrast to this, OECD has a very complicated proposal. And that is, they say first we must have a profitability threshold. And that profitability threshold will separate routine profit from non-routine profit. So what suggestion in the blueprint is that routine profit should not be shared with market jurisdiction. And it is only non-routine profit which should be shared with market jurisdiction. So that is one very significant suggestion which is there. But developing countries, most of the countries do not agree with this. In fact, that is also noted in the blueprint that it is an open issue, because developing countries feel that why shouldn't we get a share of routine profit? Because we should also get a share of routine profit. So that is something which is still an open issue. OECD has admitted that this is an open issue. So this is where, if you recall, that last year in March, when OECD had submitted a public document for public discussion, Johnson & Johnson had given a proposal. So that Johnson & Johnson proposal is something that UN proposal is based upon. So the basic difference between Johnson & Johnson proposal and what OECD has recommended right now is that whether market jurisdiction should get a share of routine profit. And that is something which is critical to arrive at a consensus. Because if you agree that yes, market jurisdiction should also get a share of routine profit, because it does not matter. You know, the whole concept of digital taxation, the blueprint which has been published by OECD, based itself on the concept that MNCs, they participate in the economic life of market jurisdiction in a very sustained and significant manner. So the question is, if I am earning profit at 9%, does it mean I am not participating in a significant and sustained manner? And just because my net profit margin rises to 11%, then I'm participating in a significant and sustained manner. You know, how do we justify such kind of a proposition? So that is something, you know, developing country wants, that they should also get a share of routine profit. Now, if you agree that they should get a share of routine profit, then all the system of profit allocation that has been suggested in the blueprint, that there should be first profitability threshold, then there should be reallocation percentage, and then there should be allocation keys. No, all that may not be required. Then probably that Johnson & Johnson proposal, which was given earlier, based on which UN proposal is based, is probably a better and simple solution. So this is where, you know, I'm coming at, that probably this is going to be a very significant discussion in OECD, in inclusive framework in the coming months. And probably UN proposal, very elementary, probably less practical at this stage, but there is something in the UN proposal which may guide the discussion in coming months. So this is just I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let me go to Mark. You know, I mean, lots of interesting points have come up, you know, including UN and OECD and how complicated it is and how the allocation being done. Mark, what is your take on this? You know, the allocation of this profit.
Oh, the allocation is one issue, and the other issue that we've alluded to is what we call the nexus issue, and actually, what are we taxing? You know, taxing revenue. So, you know, conceptually, my take, okay, is that we have a lot of tax professionals globally who are used to a tax system based on income taxes, whether that involves foreign tax credits, reduction of double tax under our tax treaties. We're used to a certain international norm, if you will. And this international norm doesn't fit very well with the digital tax pillars, as well as the unilateral actions that are occurring in many countries that we reviewed earlier. So my take is that the nexus issues, and then secondly, the allocation issues are certainly open. The scope of who's included in this and these proposals is no question an open issue. And then more importantly, assuming there is a general consensus, how do we create a process that makes this work? I actually could see this taking several years, even if a general consensus is reached.
Okay, thanks a ton. Let me go to Mr. Rohan. Sir, I mean, this allocation part is a little complicated in the blueprint, particularly Pillar 1. And maybe for the benefit of the audience, I would request you to articulate it in such a way that, it looks very simple. Although OECD has tried its best not to make it very simple.
Shailendra, I think you put to me a task which is beyond me. Somebody, Mr. Varshney's very in-depth knowledge is probably best suited to that. But
Yes.
I think we should turn it over to him. But let me just say this, that this whole situation of what OECD has done, which has been extremely detailed, and now what UN has done, and as Mr. Varshney said, this whole net basis of taxation, which in a way almost in the Indian system becomes like a presumptive tax, that you go on the basis of saying, of course there is a taxing event, and of course a certain amount needs to be brought to tax, but we agree to say that whatever figure we take, whether it's 30%, 20%, that really is what we presume to be allocable to the jurisdiction in which the business is done and in which the consumer of the goods or services is. Now, once it becomes a presumptive basis of taxation, obviously what you do is a lot of the other detailing which has sort of gone into this, the whole amount A scenario, the whole amount B scenario. In amount A, you're sort of talking of new taxing rights for the market jurisdiction. Amount B, you're talking of fixed return for certain baseline marketing, distribution, etc. Now, all of that, which has seen a great deal of thought and balance, ultimately is building complication. And from that perspective, one of the underlying subtext also is that we do want to achieve a mechanism which has certainty, allied with the fact that we want to either reduce or eliminate disputes. And as and when disputes come, we want them to effectively be addressed by a set of a determination panel, for example, that everybody will respect and follow. Now, as Mark rightly said, by the time we are able to engage on the very many aspects that OECD has brought forth, and they're all very finely nuanced aspects in terms of routine profit, non-routine, jurisdictional allocation, where is value created, etc., where is the consumer. But by the time that we can achieve consensus on that, I think the time frame which will ensue will lead to a whole series of local legislation sort of taking over, which will not have any international backing. So while I think the great detailing which has been done reflects the complexity of business and tax law, I think the more complex the basis, like what we've sort of now got, your whole pillar 1, the lesser the likelihood that we will achieve consensus. Therefore, the greater the chance we'll go in different directions. But the task of simplifying pillar 1, I would only look to Mr. Varshney, because as I understand it, it's extremely nuanced. But ultimately, what you're looking for is to segregate routine and non-routine. You're looking for jurisdictions which create the value to really be able to have an ability to tax at least what is appropriable to them. That's how I see it simply. But over to Mr. Varshney.
Yes, yes, sir. I mean, rightly said. Maybe, sir, you could, because a large number of developing and emerging economies, they are looking at, the entire matrix being built by the OECD for the allocation of A, B, C, and how do you simplify it, sir? For the audiences, in order to understand it.
Yeah, see, it's very simple. What they have done is, what they have proposed is for amount A right now. So amount C they have given up. So it's only amount A and B right now. Amount A is that what share of tax from digital economy be given to the market jurisdiction. So what they have done is that first of all, no number has been decided yet. So I'm going to speak with assumption of assuming some numbers. Those numbers are not final. None of the number is final yet in the proposal. So that should be made clear first. So let us say that I am a multinational company and I am making a profit of $100. So what OECD proposal says that what is your profit margin? So first I need to calculate that profit margin, and therefore we had some complication. That complication cannot be eliminated because that profit margin needs to be calculated based on some simplicity, and for that simplicity you need to do certain adjustment and all, and you just cannot do away with that. So that is well taken, very good work which has been done by OECD in that aspect. So first, my net profit is to be calculated. Let's say the profit threshold is decided at 10% assumption, and my profit margin turns out to be 9%. Then OECD will say that this MNC will not pay anything to market jurisdiction because we have assumed that 10% is a routine profit, and he is making less than 10%. So that means he does not have to share anything with the market jurisdiction, which is where the market jurisdictions, developing economies have little reservations because they feel that even this MNC is participating in the economic life of marketing jurisdiction through sustained interaction with the customers. So why should I not be allowed to have a share of this 9% as well? But going forward, let us say this MNC has a profit margin of 12%. Then the proposal says that 10% is routine profit, but this 2% would be used for allocation. Not that this 2% will also go to market jurisdiction. Again, from this 2%, there will be reallocation percentage. We don't know what is that at this point of time, but let us say it is 30%. That means out of 2%, only 0.6% of MNC's profit will go to market jurisdiction. Now, that is something probably the feeling is that so many years of hard work has gone into it, and so much effort have been made by the OECD Secretariat and all the countries, the government officers who have represented their countries. And if after all this, what you are going to get for market jurisdiction for developing economies is a very small amount, then probably this work will all go waste. And you might say that we have reached consensus today, but after 1 year or 2 years, there are going to be again a problem. So whatever solution that must emerge from OECD must be a long-lasting solution. You should not have a situation where only a small amount is given. And there is a complication even after that. You decided that only 30% of profit, which is more than routine profit, would go to market jurisdiction. And from that 30%, you will decide which market jurisdiction will get. So there is a nexus rule. So nexus rule will determine that India will get, and let's say Bangladesh will not get. I'm assuming, it could be the other way around. So what they say, then what is the sale in Bangladesh? Now that sale, Bangladesh have not got any tax on that. So where will that tax go? Because you have already decided in the formula that the MNC made a profit of 12%, and 2% is a non-routine profit, and 30% of 2%, that is 0.6% profit, will go to all market jurisdiction. And out of that, it will go to everybody based on sales. But Bangladesh did not pass the nexus test. So they will say, what will happen to this particular profit? They said this will go back to the, back. That is throwback concept. not throw in concept. So what marketing jurisdiction are saying, at least don't take that back. If Bangladesh is not passing nexus test, that profit should be allocated amongst the jurisdiction who are passing nexus test. So there are a lot of complications which have come in, and therefore I'm saying that Johnson and Johnson proposal, which was part of the discussion of OECD 1 year back, or about 1.5 years back, and based on which UN has recommended their net profit based taxation, is something which was much simpler. And but anyway, lot of work has happened after that rejection of that proposal. So I don't know whether anybody is going to go back to that proposal, but I always felt, my personal view, that was a much simpler proposal.
Right, sir. So in a nutshell, what you said, sir, that, OECD has put a lot of genius into this blueprint, to make it complicated with a lot of simplicity. So OECD has done its job beautifully. Yeah. So, let me go to Mr. Mark. Maybe, Mark would like to tell us a little bit more elaborate about the US areas of differences. Because the whole dialogue collapsed, and probably because the US was not too keen to to ensure that the talk sails through this time, and that is how it was deferred. So what happened, and how do you articulate the whole thing? The US stand on this.
Well, I think you're asking about how would I describe the US. You say what happened, like there was a monumental event. I think it's a confluence of several events that are occurring. So first of all, let me just say, I think the pause, I think the delay to the beginning, middle of next year, I believe it's June, is a good thing. I think that's good. Within our own process and policy, we don't. There's a lot of voices that say that these laws and what's occurring aggressively, particularly within some countries in the EU, I won't name them, France, is discriminatory against US-based companies. It's very simple. I think a lot of people can figure that out. So what happens is probably a result of a lot of things going on, and also input from the current administration, okay? And so all eyes now are on what could happen in the next, if there's another administration, or if there's the current administration, and what scenarios would happen in other elections. In our Congress, which consists of a Senate and a House. The Senate ratifies treaties and deals with a lot of trade and so forth. And there are individuals we're looking at, and we know how they generally would stand. But given certain scenarios, for example, if there is a complete Democratic sweep, there's going to be a major policy change regarding the OECD and our relationship with a lot of international organizations. So this is very important to understand that aspect of it. So what is happening now, I think you're saying what happened, is that we have negotiators and we're all, sitting back and understanding what's been said and what's been done publicly, particularly by our Treasury Secretary, and what we've done, or as was discussed earlier, what we haven't done. All plays into why a pause and this delay was a good thing. Because I think on our side, we definitely have views that a consensus, given the fact that there are issues, these are trained, very experienced diplomats and negotiators. Okay, we know how to find consensus. I think that's a skill that not everybody has, but certainly those in this type of negotiating setting do have. And so finding a consensus could work. And there's also some posturing going on here. And this could end up being very chaotic. And there could be trade wars, there could be tariffs, a lot of things could happen. That's why I mentioned earlier when you asked the first question that yes, I think there's a little bit of drama here because we have deadline dates now that nobody wants to budge on. We have countries that have a lot of pressure due to the pandemic. We have a lot of political changes occurring or potentially occurring. And so all of these is a perfect storm for something that's going to give. And I think that's going to we'll know more certainly in the next few months. But you asked what happened, and so what happened happened. But what could happen going forward, given any scenario that might occur, really is going to drive the U.S. business, because our policymakers are driven by, as I mentioned before, driven by our tax base, by our forecasts, and making investment in the U.S. attractive. We look at those scenarios, and policymakers follow those rules in unison. Hope that helps.
Thank you. So Mark, here, in fact, let me bring it to your notice that a good number of EU countries and economies, and also some of the Asian and African economies, they have made allegations against the US that on the one hand, US is stalling the dialogue, and they are not letting the OECD to arrive at any kind of consensus. On the other hand, US is very prompt in invoking and misusing its Super 301 toolbox. How do you defend the US here? Good number of economies.
Well, look, we're fully aware of how we're perceived, and there's a PR element to this as well. But then it goes back to what we're doing or not doing, which is probably calculated. I'm not one of the negotiators, okay? So I do know that the administration is taking a strong stance, and so are the countries, and so are the African nations, as you mentioned, and that may in fact grow. So we're all hoping. I don't think anybody intends for there to be this perfect storm, or the toolbox that you mentioned, to having to use any more of those tools. And I think, I hope that there's an avoidance of that in the future, and a consensus.
Yeah. Well, let me go to Mr. Varshney. Sir, in fact, this threat came, when India has been sort of implementing the equalization levy as per that, the BEPS project, and US announced that they will initiate this 301 investigation against many countries, including India. So how did you cope up with this kind of? Was it a pure diplomacy, the fiscal diplomacy, or what was the reaction, in North Bloc?
No, nothing. It's okay. Every country has a right to put forward its interest and engage in discussion with other countries. So we are in discussion with USA on this issue, and we are quite confident that we will resolve this bilaterally.
Right. Perfect. Let me go to Mr. Rohan. Sir, how do you look at of course a good number of intellectuals are involved. The fiscal elites are involved in the dialogue, and fiscal elites, we can expect that they will certainly come up with some kind of solutions, and this stalemate should not be allowed to prolong further, but if it prolongs, what will happen to the global economy, which is already down in dumps thanks to COVID?
Shailendra, let me tie this in with your previous issue in terms of the 301 action, right?
Right.
So what we're seeing is, while OECD is the forum of consensus, we are, I guess, everybody trying to build consensus. The situation is OECD does not control outlier actions. So if you have a situation where US says 10 countries which in some form or manner have brought an equalization levy, I am going to use what is a trade retaliatory measure, and I am going to sort of invoke this, and this is targeted at 10 of you because you have brought a tax which is discriminatory. In the context of France, that has probably sort of progressed in terms of negotiation and hardening of positions more than, let us say, has happened with the other nations. The issue you have is that, if you are in a forum of consensus and things are not quite going your way, then is the answer in that situation to say, I will use all the unilateral weapons that I have to try and make the world see this in the way that I want the world to see it. Now, in some way, I had something to do with the defense that we have filed in relation to the 301 action, right? And the situation is, this is not only targeted at US. Anyone who undertakes this nature of a business and is outside of India is equally going to be susceptible to the tax. So, this is not, a particularly US targeted, US actuated, mechanism for all of the countries around, right? So while this sort of debate will go on, and as Mr. Varshney says, our official position must be that, we will find something, and, we are in a phase of even having some, quite high level dignitaries from the US in our country over the last few days. The issue is that, if my tax collection from something is likely to be, let us say, $500 million, but my loss of export opportunity is going to be $1.5 billion, which then resonates into, X number of 100,000 jobs, then, we are really playing on two turfs. We are negotiating in the OECD, but we are battling on the trade front. And the more that something like this happens, the lesser is the ability to get sustainable consensus. As Mr. Varshney says, it's no point our agreeing to then after 2-3 years disagree. And we've seen that happen in other forums internationally. And one has to hope that that will not recur. So, all the intellectuals and all the scholars and everyone, I mean, ultimately, I think we all have a common mission, the common man like me, the intellectuals, the tax policy gurus. The bottom line over here is, can we form a consensus so that, this stream of activity is taxed in a predictable, equitable manner? But to do that, is taken the world millions of man hours, and probably will take us 1 million man hours more.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. In fact, I mean, before we go for the last round of questions, because we will have another panel waiting in the wings, let me go to Mark. Mr. Mark, in fact, developing countries and EU, of course, they have been nursing, some sort of grudge against this GAFA and, this Silicon Valley, the companies which are not apparently paying taxes here in market jurisdictions, etc. But the fact that they are not paying taxes even in the USA. They're perhaps paying it somewhere in Ireland and some other places, maybe Luxembourg or some other areas. How exactly the US and IRS is coping up with this kind of thing? Because they also need revenue. I mean, it's a COVID time, and every government, not only developing country, even the rich economies, they have announced huge stimulus, the fiscal stimulus package, and they need revenue, they need money. So, but how exactly they are coping up? Is there any change in the stand internally or something, or maybe only the Joe Biden administration will do something about it? Mr. Trump.
Yeah, well, you kind of raised some interesting points there. I mean, this is, these are U.S. originated companies, okay, and depending upon what benefits a particular country's self-interest, given what we're doing, we could be against them or with them, and in this case, it's protecting an interest, it's protecting a base. Yes, they've moved overseas, and there's a lot of overlap and so forth. And I'm not going to get into that, how they're structured. I don't want to speak for these large companies. That has been the largest focus, but these OECD proposals really bring in many more consumer-facing companies, as well as companies that never ever thought that they would be subjected, perhaps, to these laws that are being considered. So and certainly there could be a threshold, and there's going to be some work to be done. But when you look at the large companies, the Facebooks, the Apples, the Googles, that initially may be what a person who has not been following this very clearly will think about. But really, it's a much broader issue, and it really deals with the future of electronic commerce going forward. And again, as I mentioned before, this doesn't fit well within our international norms. And so adapting to a completely different system, a new system of taxation that we have to apply our existing tax laws and treaties to, and turning upside down a lot of other areas that the countries have just recently are getting more comfortable with, isn't something that can be done in a short period of time. But get back to your question, yes, the larger companies do have a U.S. interest and will remain of a U.S. interest to us. So, but there's a lot of internal issues that are brought up, and you know, I can't get into those, but that's certainly a good question.
Yeah, thank you. Let me also pick up a couple of questions, you know, which we have received a good number of questions. One gentleman has suggested that instead of taxing the digital economy or bringing the same in the ambit of tax, whether equivalent tax amount can be collected in the form of environmental contribution. I mean, that's a totally different idea, actually. You know, that rather than going for, you know, digital tax, maybe, you know, some amount could be collected as, you know, environmental contribution from the MNCs, you know. But that's a different, you know, that's a different area of discussion and debate. Let me avoid that. We have another gentleman who is saying that should there be a different scheme of taxation for B2B and B2C companies? Withholding tax being implemented through paying entities in B2B transactions and through collecting banks for B2C transactions. Maybe any panelist, I would request one of the panelists to take up if you see some merit in this.
I think, see, Shailendra, once again, you know, there can be many suggestions, but ultimately you will have to adopt a solution which is less complex. Now, just think of it. You know, you are mixing two things. You know, B2B, you do this, B2C, you do that, and then you are going to have litigation on what is B2B and what is B2C, whether he did it or that it should have been done in that manner. You know, it's going to have a huge complication, and therefore we need to think of a solution which is less complicated. Like one of the question which is also there in the question box is that can we have you know, measure the value contribution by the market jurisdiction and then give him the tax accordingly? How do you do that? I mean, the simple question is how can you you know, and that is where you are going to make it more complicated and more dispute oriented, and therefore you need to have a formalistic approach. You need to have a formula. In fact, whether UN proposal or even today OECD proposal, what I discussed some time back is a bit complicated, but it is still formula based. And you can only have formula based solution here. You cannot have somebody measuring the value contribution in a country and then decide, and then deciding how much that country should get, because it is not one country who is alone, because all other countries are party to it. So one country, India, start measuring the contribution in India, which is not acceptable to 15 other market jurisdiction and also 5 other countries where the MNC headquarter or R&D centers are located. Then you are going to have a huge complication. So once again, you know what OECD is trying to do, what UN is trying to do, whatever solution, it has to be formula based and has to be simple.
Right. So thank you. I mean, before I invite my colleague, Mr. R. Sridhar, to propose a vote of thanks, let me have a common question for all the 3 panelists, sir. How do you look at, do you think that since there is no expiry date for COVID-19, do you think, and every government is short of funds now, and particularly because after this, you know, the fiscal stimulus, economic stimulus being you know, announced left, right, and center in terms of trillions of dollars, etc., and even the developing and poor countries, based on their own capacities, they have also done so. Do you think that, you know, this COVID will certainly speed up or help or enable OECD or all the stakeholders to arrive at some sort of consensus by middle of 2021?
So I'll take that quickly. But if your question is, will any prolonged COVID problems perhaps impact the negotiations? My last discussions, and this was in recent weeks, is that not speaking on behalf of the U.S., but on behalf of the EU, as mentioned, is that no, there's no appetite on moving beyond June. That's not. I'm not a medical expert. I don't know what that's. You know, how COVID, you know, might upend that view, but that's the view as of now.
Right. We are talking about very unknown enemies. So, you know, I mean, that's a big challenge, you know, for all of us. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. So how do you look at this? Mr. Rohan Sir perhaps would like to throw some light here.
I think COVID is so uncertain. And as somebody else has said that, you know, the only thing certain beyond death is tax. So we will have to tax, we will have to collect. I don't think those who sit at the table to deal with the issues of taxation and tax policy have any more predictability than any one of us in terms of where COVID is going to go. But if COVID is going to be a bigger drain on the national exchequer in every country, and if that has to be made up in some way with taxation, then either you're going to have more domestic tax, or more people are going to reach out to say consensus or no consensus. You know, if you want to operate in my country, then this is the share of the pie that I want. I do hope that there is, wisdom all around and we quickly get to consensus. But I don't think COVID is going to be that catalyst for consensus.
Right. So, Mr. Varshney would like to add something here, sir, or you'd like to?
Yes, I will just say, basically difficult time. You should. I fully agree with Rohan that COVID or no COVID, consensus is the need of the hour. But probably like what India has done, something because we have to do reforms, and probably when we are hit hard by COVID, our tax revenues are hit very hard. Then India has taken huge steps in tax reforms, at least in procedure, like faceless assessment and faceless appeals. So this is something which has happened during COVID time, and it's a huge path-breaking reforms. So in that way, probably yes, that when countries are hit by COVID, probably they should look at this prospect of arriving a consensus at an early date, and that so that it helps everyone.
Right, and particularly when the OECD itself, in its press communique, stated that almost $100 billion, will come into the kitty, which is to be shared among the countries. So that's a huge amount. I mean, during COVID time, perhaps it will help. So, let me thank from my side, at least, all the three distinguished panelists for their insightful, the views and very interesting comments and what's going on and what will happen in the coming months. And I am very hopeful that, the positive things will happen in next, 6 to 7 months, including the, the expiry of COVID-19, which is, behaving like a marauder, for the entire humanity. So, maybe Mr. Sridhar is around, then I would request him to propose a vote of thanks. Rishabh?
Yeah. So we are thankful for all the panelists who have contributed to the panel 1 on policy. Our special thanks to Mr. Mark Baran, Mr. Sri Kamlesh Varshney ji, and Mr. Rohan Shah for giving the time. And thank you, Shailendra ji, for giving this, opportunity to all our listeners and participants to understand the topic from the policy perspective. Mr. Sridhar is there. I will request him to please give a vote of thanks, and then we'll quickly move to the panel 2.
Yeah, I think, Rishabh, I think you have already given the vote of thanks. I don't think so. I'll have to repeat. But it is such a pleasure always to listen to Mr. Kamlesh Varshney, Mr. Mark, and of course, Mr. Rohan. I don't have to say anything because he's a part of TIOL, always as a speaker whenever we have such interesting issues on board. And I must thank all of them, and interesting perspectives and difficult times ahead of us. We need to face them like we face COVID. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sridhar. It's always good to be thanked twice or thrice.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So I now request my friend Mr. Mateo to formally start the panel 2. So in panel 2, which I will be moderating, so I just want to introduce you with all the panel experts today we have, and they have all joined in. So we have Dr. William Barnes, Executive Professor of Law, Associate Dean for Special Projects, School of Law, A&M University, Texas, USA. He has written a lot of books, 150,000 print subscription, and his Lexis books are accessed by more than 20,000 times annually by the government and private attorneys. His 1,000 plus national underwriters, Lexis and Kluwer's articles are cited by mainstream financial press like Wall Street Journal and trade sites. He's an educational innovator. He has pioneered in online education in early 90s. His programs received praise by the best practices pedagogy and have more than 1,000 alumni. US Department of State Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs elected him as a Fulbright specialist for pedagogy and for comparative taxation. Thank you, Mr. William Barnes, for being here in the panel 2 as an expert. In this panel, we have Mr. Tarun Gulati, a senior counsel and tax litigation experts. Mr. Tarun Gulati is a senior advocate practicing at the Supreme Court of India. He is engaged to represent top Indian and multinational companies in extremely contentious matters before courts and tribunals throughout India. His practice areas include taxation, commercial dispute, regulatory litigation, competition and trade law. He is also a qualified chartered accountant. Thank you, Mr. Gulati, for being part of the panel 2. Mr. Gopala Ramnan, Vice President and JPAC Controller, Global Controller Organization of Oracle India. He is a finance leader with 3 decades of experience in corporate finance, controllership, M&A, treasury, taxation, corporate secretarial and legal function. He has served many corporate boards in the capacity of non-independent director. He has been with Oracle for last 16 years. He has handled financial controllership, US GAAP, local statutory accounting, merger acquisition, treasury, audit, risk, compliance, and finance, technology, and leadership, integration of all. Being a qualified company secretary, cost and management accountant, chartered accountant, he has completed his executive management program for IIM Bangalore. His passion for risk and compliance led him to postgraduate diploma in criminology and forensic science and master in psychology. He is a certified Six Sigma Green Belt, avid blogger and business mentor coach. Today, he will discuss about the technology aspect of digital economy, AI, etc. Mr. Prabin Dokania is Chief Finance Officer, probably the world's largest GST network called GSTN. He is Chief Finance Officer of Goods and Services Tax Network, a technology backbone of India's biggest tax reform, which is GST. Award winner CFO, seasoned professional with CA, ICWA, CS and DISA qualification under his belt. He is a thought leader and speaks at various forums of finance, digital economy, and strategic issues, including innovation. He carries 22 years of Fortune 500 Big Four management consulting firm, and today he's working in a public-private partnership organization called GSTN. He's also mentor to various startups and awarded as a CFO Power List of 2019, recognized as top 100 CFO by CFO India. And this is me I'm going to, take the opportunity to present all my esteemed, I would say, panelists who have agreed. First of all, thank you for giving this time to all our listeners who are there on YouTube as well as in this webinar. Once again, for the benefit of the listeners, I will request you to share your question directly in the Q&A box so that we can take it up during the course as well as at the end of the panel. So first of all, I will start with Mr. Tarun Gulati. Mr. Tarun Gulati, as this panel 1 was very, very heavy on policy. Now, I would like to know from you, being a tax litigation practice for last so many decades, how you see tax fairness for digital economy converting into a digital trade war if OECD attempts fail to establish a consensus between USA and EU. Of course, the question is international implication as well as implication on a country like India as well. So what should be the ideal framework for India to tax digital economy, which is bound to grow? Over to you, sir.
I think your question is in 2 parts. One, whether this will lead to a digital tax trade war, and what should be the ideal framework for India. I think before we get into that, like in the first panel, where are we today? I think that's where we need to see. And as everybody has said, that OECD has made a tremendous effort in trying to at least, develop a model. And they've come out with a unified approach, and they've got these 2 reports, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Yes, there is a lot of criticism to say that it's quite complex, and it may be complex. And as Mr. Varshney said, that the complexity arises because of the issues which are complex. So it's not just that the formation of the report is complex, but you have to cater to varying, I think, differing philosophies and competing interests of so many countries. It is bound to get complex. That's where we are. And then, there have been other proposals. One proposal by Mr. Rajat Bansal was there, which was discussed, criticized again, and probably, still under discussion at some stage. And then the UN committee has proposed the amendment and creation of a new article, Article 12B. There are other proposals by companies. So we are certainly not at a consensus level right now. And if we are not at a consensus level, I think one of the major issues is that there has to be a mindset change. We are moving away from what was something which was prevalent from the physical place of business based taxation, the PE based taxation that we were now, because we are getting into digital transactions, which, and your presentation initially indicated the prevalence of digital transactions and how it is increasing. So we need a mindset change. We need to share with the source economies, with the places where large consumer bases are, and many of those, like in India, we are developing economies. They are rightfully trying to say that we need a share of that tax, and unless that mindset change comes around, I don't think we are going to come to any level of consensus. In these times, and while we look at the OECD reports, there are definitions of consumer facing business, automated digital services, there are threshold issues, several filters are being created and all of that. Those are, the more complex this gets, the more difficult it will get to create a consensus. And therefore, until we are able to come to a simplified solution where many people will, of course, there will have to be a lot of give and take, consensus will not be achieved. And if consensus is not achieved, then we are looking at unilateral measures. We are already looking at digital services tax, which are being imposed by many countries. We have Italy, France, UK, Spain, Turkey, Brazil, Austria. India's got a equalization levy in place. So yes, to some extent, unilateral measures will lead to some kind of a digital trade war here. And that's inevitable, because I think countries will not wait for that consensus forever. There are revenue issues which countries are facing, and because of the pandemic, any which way, I think countries are in need for revenue, and they will not wait. Now, as far as the Indian situation is concerned, what is the ideal tax that India would want? I would think that it should be a simple tax, something that we wanted in GST, a good and simple tax. I think, a tax which has low thresholds, so the many MNCs will come into that. A tax which may be formula based, which is simple to implement, and you don't get into subjective assessments which lead to more disputes. And I guess artificial exclusions, because if you are looking at a multilateral consensus based approach, then if you have too many exclusions, it will lead to loopholes being created. And we know that even if a consensus is achieved in the medium term, it will not be easy to amend a multilateral treaty. So it should be simple. It should be a formula based approach. There should be a new taxing area which should be created for the source countries. India has a very large consumer base, and when economic values are being generated here, I think there is a case for that new tax right to a country like India to be created. And there, I think, so this I think is ultimately going to be the paradigm for taxing digital transactions. And it's in India's interest, of course, that a consensus is created, because if it is not created, then you will have domestic laws coming in, you will have issues in bilateral treaties, and renegotiating bilateral treaties is also not going to be easy. So that's where we are.
I will move to Dr. William Barnes, that when we call simplicity, the simplicity demands technology to be used in taxation also. For every dollar of tax being collected, and in digital economy, it is non-human. The transactions are happening, we are not controlling. So how do you see the role of blockchain-based technologies, the role of, I would say, artificial intelligence in terms of data mining and in terms of tax regulation, which are more simpler, less subjective, less human error prone? How do you see internationally what kind of work that has been done or can be done?
So I have two avenues along this. One is what I think, and my distinguished colleagues on the panel can really give some feedback on this, because I'm an academic and I teach both international tax risk management, but separately enterprise risk management. So avenue one is, I think that international tax risk management will converge with enterprise risk management, which is already run via software and technology. Secondly, how revenues are going to use it. So I'll do a second later in our discussions. The first is how it's going to be internally used. And so we're all familiar with publishers like Wolters Kluwer and Thomson with their tax software programs. And they're robotic in the sense that they take information and put it onto forms. It's a very early use of, let's call it robotic software, but still you got to start somewhere. So let's move it up to the current situation, because one of our panelists is from Oracle. So now you have SAP and Oracle and other large software companies here in the market. Why? This is the convergence. We all recognize that tax has been its own function within the corporate structure, especially within the enterprise risk management structure. Yes, taxes, since Starbucks, the UK hearings on Starbucks, and then Starbucks, the people wouldn't go and buy Starbucks anymore because Starbucks hadn't paid enough tax in the United Kingdom. Since then, tax is a reputational risk. Sure, that's a little facet of enterprise risk management, but the tax function is separate from the ERM function within a corporation. So why are they going to converge? Well, because we have, again, the panelist who's our award-winning CFO, I think will recognize that the driver of the convergence of ERM and TRM, tax risk management, enterprise risk management, it's going to be the CFO. Because the CFO is looking for, one, cost savings, post-COVID, post-pandemic, and number two, because with Pillar 1 and 2, this unified approach, but most importantly, Pillar 1 that you've been discussing in the first panel, the digital taxation and the double taxation that is going to result from that, and for other, new tax revenues, we don't know what they are yet. They're going to come post-COVID to pay for the COVID stimulus packages, whether it's the United States, India, or you name your country, they're all going to have them. Digital taxation can only raise so much. So in this new world order of double, maybe triple taxation with countries trying to pay back their COVID fiscal stimulus, the CFO is going to say, this tax risk directly impacts my earnings. And once you start talking about tax in the context of earnings, and it's not after tax, yes, we've always seen tax as something that addresses, profits at the end, it takes part of profits. This is going to be more of a conversation of how tax fits into the earnings statement, and it's going to be a much more integrated conversation. And ERM, enterprise risk management, has long used software, and that's where I bring back to my original, I'll be quiet then, Oracle and SAP. So Oracle, has been in the market a long time, helping data be managed for large corporations, and in particular for enterprise risk, chief risk officers who have to deal with data. And my question, what's the nightmare of every tax officer and VP of tax who inevitably reports to the CFO and therefore the CEO and board? Excel, right? Data, collecting data from the local domestic enterprise, from the cross-border, 100 subsidiaries. It's that managing that data, and that's where you have the Oracles and SAPs come in and help better manage that. And I'll talk later about how robotics and AI are gonna play a role, and then with the revenue department really using those, which again is a driver to force companies to. But hats off to Oracle for being in this marketplace.
So I will try to Gopal that as Dr. Williams says that companies like Oracle who are dealing with the worldwide cross-border transactions of every company who uses the software. So from technology standpoint, like you've been a global controller for Oracle, as well as the company which runs the global organizations are running on Oracle. So how do you see technology role in international taxation when the compliance may increase because of the unilateral attempts by various jurisdictions? So what kind of a support we can expect from technology and artificial intelligence in this area? You have to unmute, Gopal. Yeah.
Yes, today's world, the CFO role is no longer the bookkeeper. We don't even look at the books nowadays. The look at is, as he rightly mentioned, the risk, the fiduciary role of managing the risk for the organization. And also, I see a lot of the CFOs now getting into the discussion on the deployment of technology today. For example, moving to the cloud. It's like earlier we used to study, is it buy or lease? Today, the CFO is coming and saying, can I move to the cloud? What is my operational cost, whether it will go? So that's where the role is changing. And as Dr. William rightly mentioned, it should be the DNA and it should be converged, it's seen as a whole package rather than looking at it's a finance, it's a tax works separately, it's a watertight compartment. It's all gone. That's why I said the technology investment for an enterprise, why we go for an ERP is the main thing is a robust ERP gives you a daily with the artificial intelligence. When there is a slight change, say for example, you're thinking that you may get into a big deal maybe next quarter, but you are getting it in this quarter. The sales team will update. Immediately it should work on the what is my tax liability on that particular region with my average tax rate at a global level. So I need to get those data immediately. For example, like when we close the quarter and publish our results, the results are published on the 10th of the following the quarter end. The reason is we are able to see the numbers on a real-time basis, and the tax is also able to work parallelly with that. And then on the workday 5, they come and say, this is your tax number. So this is how the earlier, it's like, okay, once we done, we just give the template, they take 2 days, and then they see that, okay, we work the taxation and then give it. But on a real-time basis, the tax planning or the strategy, whatever we used to do today was not done even 5-6 years before. With so many things which is opened up, the global has become, I would say, a village now, with the boundaries are torn apart. I think we should be looking at a real-time tax strategy to be adopted by the organization so that you don't have any risk. As you rightly mentioned, like Starbucks, it's a reputation risk for a big organization. If you even by mistake, you miss out on some of this tax planning and end up paying more tax, or you just be a violator there in that particular country. So did that answer, Shah?
So
I can talk on the technology part, like per se going into AI and ML, but I just want to give
the brand
overview
management. Yeah.
Looks like we're having technical difficulties.
Basically, and yeah, I think we are able to hear. I think there is some internet issue. So I will move to Prabin, Mr. Prabin Dokania, who is a CFO with GSTN. So GST network started with the technology backbone to manage the mammoth task of collecting the data and mining that data for the tax regulation to become literally faceless in years to come. And it is going to happen. It has already started happening. So with international tax scenario, I would like to know from Prabin that your experience being a CFO in GSTN and you have seen the evolution. How do you see that this technology can help even in managing the digital economy transaction also, which are actually happening without any human? Can it also possible that without any human intervention, it can be taxed, and it can be taxed judiciously if we create some sort of a technology consensus, not a tax consensus, but a technology consensus amongst the world's large economies? Is it possible?
Thank you, Rishabh. It's a privilege to be part of this diverse forum and with a diverse audience. So let me share the experience of GSTN and how we are doing and Indian experience into it. So in GSTN, it's you have correctly said, and in your first session, it's a technology backbone and Indian economy runs on GST. So every tax data, every data point is with us. So whatever now with the introduction of e-invoice, so now any B2B transaction is happening in India. It's a being captured on a real-time basis. So it's a phenomenal technological advancement, you can say that. And with regards to your question, so I personally involved in developing that e-invoice schema. So what the backbone we have taken the international backbone, the PayPal backbone, where the European Union and the other countries that South America's countries and all, they have taken that LATAM and all. So we have taken that backbone. So taking a long-term view and perspective, if tomorrow with the international transaction, the same invoice we can replicate. So there will be no technological hurdle per se into that. So through API and data, that can be, the data can be exchanged on a real-time basis. Either it's export, import, whatever it is on. So the time lagging between that bill of entry and other thing can be reduced and be sorted in the real-time basis. So we have taken the step and foresee those kind of a thing and develop the schema like that and making it a little bit Indianized. So that's a one step. And the other initiative we have taken where the things can be totally digital way, the compliances are becoming so much of a handy and so much of a digital. Like if there for the convenience of the taxpayer, if there is no transaction, so through SMS you can file your return. So that's another step of going towards digital and making the hassle-free compliances issue. So in a nutshell, it's my view that with the 4T, we can make the total thing simpler. So the 4T is tax, technology, transparency, and transform. So when you club the tax and technology, then automatically the transformation will happen and the transparency will come into the total ecosystem, and we'll do the clean business and every taxpayer will be happy. So that transformation is required, and our motto in GSTN, that 4T, how we'll bring into the 2T is already that tax and technology has already married. And then transformation is on the progress, and then transparency will come up. Like Tarun has said, and my other co-panelists has said, that faceless assessment. So those kind of things will come up. That has been started in the direct tax, indirect tax, that same step, and other things will come up. So then the motto will be hassle-free taxation regime with the help of technology.
So I will thank you, Prabin. I think your answer talks about 4T. So one is transparency. I will move to Tarun Gulati for the question that in terms of transparency, we have seen low tax jurisdiction, higher tax jurisdiction, and they are perennial source of legitimate tax planning for decades, for ages. Now in digital economy, after COVID, we have seen a dynamic shift in the trade patterns. And in digital economy also, like we all are connected from various location jurisdictions. So it's like no border, it's a borderless transactions are happening. So in this scenario, how the transparency and trust will come in the picture, and how the digital economy taxation will become more consensus and trust oriented. What challenges do you see in this?
You see, depending on how we tax digital transactions, it will all depend on that. You know, the low tax jurisdiction versus the high tax jurisdiction issues basically arose where physical presence was the basis of taxation. So where you are registered, where you are ordinarily resident. If those are the basis, then somebody can locate itself in a low tax jurisdiction. But when you give a new right to tax to a source country or to a market country, then it is the consumer base which determines the tax or the share of tax that the source country will get. In that scenario, I don't see this moving of the tax to a low tax jurisdiction. Then it's the transaction based taxation right which is going to be given to a country. In that situation, what is likely to happen, and I think the problems will arise where there is no consensus at all. Then you will have unilateral measures, and if you have unilateral measures, they are likely to be multiple, taxes, as Dr. Byrnes has also said. that there will be multiple taxes and consumers will suffer. There will be disputes as to which jurisdiction has the right to pay tax. The issue, the very purpose of bilateral agreements in the shape of DTAs will be defeated, and probably DTAs will have to be renegotiated, or domestic laws will be amended to get over the DTAs if the benefits are sought by such companies on account of multiple taxation. So according to me, it will really depend on how this ultimately pans out. If we are able to arrive at a consensus and there is a multilateral agreement, I think it will be easier for this to be handled. There will have to be a give and take. There will have to be a compromise. There are too many competing interests here, and I think there is no ideal situation in where we can achieve perfection. So many as I said in my previous response also, that there has to be a definite mindset change. And once you evolve this new process, and if it is a simple process which can be implemented, hopefully we will not see the shifting of the tax base from a high tax jurisdiction to a low tax jurisdiction. In any case, I think if we need to tax digital economy, then the tax has to be ambient. It has to be benign. If we can't go from a zero or a low tax situation to multiple taxes where the business's growth itself is stunted. If that happens, then it is the consumer ultimately which will suffer, because whether you impose a direct tax on digital transactions or you impose an indirect tax, ultimately companies will be wedded to their bottom lines. The post-tax profit is what they will be looking at. And if that suffers, ultimately it will lead to increase in prices and it will stunt growth. So that is where I think, in arriving at consensus, people have to see how we arrive at a consensus to share the tax base between different competing interests, and also make it long lasting, make it simple and long lasting.
So I think very good analysis by Tarun. Dr. William Burns, I just want to know that, from your lot of work you have done in technology space of tax technology. So is there any help which we can derive from AI and ML when the transaction volumes are huge across borders? Is there any possibility that ERP system can capture the future of nation because the tax laws are keep on evolving, keep on changing? That is external data set. Internally, the transactions volumes are going up. For example, music streaming. One music company in one part of the Korea is basically managing the the audience across the borders. Now, how that income, the profits, etc., can be predicted for the investor point of view, from the government point of view, that what is the future digital tax that this company is going to create across jurisdiction? Is there any AI and ML tool right now, any global experience or something in making? Like Uber, we know it is very predictable. One app, you go to any country, you just put the app on and you are done. You will get a car. It's very predictable. Is there anything predictable such that AI ML can help in tax world also?
Okay, so you're talking about the holy grail of enterprise risk management and tax risk management. The holy grail is that your CFO walks in his office, pushes a button, and the software kicks out predictable, reliant, forecasting you can rely upon within obviously a certain margin of error, because nothing's perfect. And within a certain margin of error, whether it's forecasting the income in a country from, as you said, an Uber app, or forecasting your digital tax. Now, the answer is that's the holy grail. It doesn't exist. And I won't go into that, but the fact is there is no software yet that has the artificial intelligence predictability regarding either the financial forecasting. It's getting better. That's machine learning. It learns and gets better as humans interact with the outputs. And then anyway, so to back into the digital tax discussion though, we don't have agreement yet. So we don't know what the pillar one, if you will, or unified solution looks like. So you can't, there are example software outputs by the big four and so forth of what this would look like. Companies are running internal tests, but it's too rudimentary because we don't know what the results. What we do know is withholding taxes. And I support actually the withholding tax, and I support India's GST and so forth. But so withholding taxes for a long time, since the late 80s, with the software that even existed back then, was able to be, you could forecast what your withholding tax would be around the world, and you could forecast what the tax credits would be around the world. And that was actually developed by a professor, Lars Eric went ahead in Sweden, and he sold that long. He's retired, and I think that's part of the Thomson package now. But very rudimentary back then, and you could forecast your tax credits, and it was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, but you're never going to get rid of humans, thank God. Robots will not take over the tax function. Today, because there's such a focus from the CFO in particular on enterprise risk management, including tax risk management, you're going to have the resources necessary for the tax departments to evolve, and they want to evolve. They don't want to be, as I mentioned, the Excel data crunchers, finding the data, moving it from one Excel to another, putting it into the tax calculations, which are different from your financial forecasting and so forth. They don't want to be that person. They would like to have software and robotics doing that for them. They want to have machine learning where they can interact with the software so that the software improves itself and begins. I'll give you one example, and I'll be quiet. One example of software where I think you're going to have both revenue departments and the companies create efficiencies, and maybe forecasting for digital tax later on. But let me use something that does exist: interest ratios. Every country has debt to equity ratio, and in every country, some amount of interest paid to related parties is too much. However, your country calculates that. So software can very easily take all the data from the finances, take the data from the tax, in particular focusing on the interest payments, in particular focusing on, by example, the basis in equity and capital expenditure, CapEx, and so forth on the finance side. And it can quickly, comparatively, give you ratios like interest paid to equity or whatever. And that can red flag to the CFO. It's going to get a lot of wrong. And the CFO, through participating in the software development process, now that's very labor intensive. So every CFO team is going to have to make a decision about, one's the cost in terms of money, but the other is going to be the cost in terms of labor. Overall, over time, a decade from now, this will not be a discussion anymore. It will have been done. And to finalize this, that's internally within the company. The revenue departments are going to be doing this. And so the revenue department's going to be able to take your company's interest versus your company's finances, do a quick comparison across the entire marketplace of information that they have, which are public accounts and the taxpayer filed accounts. And they're going to be able to benchmark your company against all companies like a transfer pricing exercise. That's where big data software is going to take us. The Oracles, the SAPs are going to be working with the big tax departments to help tax departments, both internally and externally, i.e. the government tax authorities, to get to that place. And that's going to be a new world. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, so Gopal, I just want to know from you, because now everybody is now pointing out to Oracle that, whether this big data and, the complete, because last year I got an opportunity to interview 15 global CFOs. And one pain point was common, that multiple Excel sheets for tax management and hundreds of people in tax department, and business continue to issue when one person leaves the company and join other company. And after 5 years, the revenue department comes for litigation. So how do you see that the ERPs of the future are going to be more predictable with the use of technology in tax? Because that is what the question, the worldwide, because today a small person can also become a multinational. It's not necessary that, he need to be a multi-billion-dollar company. Even a startup can become a multinational. So how do you see technology helping in the tax compliances and tax management?
Okay, I would start with the caveat saying that I know for sure that machines are reducing the dependency on the human element, but they cannot get away with that. And again, machines cannot think the way human, though you can say it's artificial intelligence. For example, unless you feed them with the data, the machine cannot learn. So you have to make the machine learn on that one. And artificial intelligence, there's a tax law change which is happening. I don't think that we have connected so well that we also, the tax management system also changes according to the regulation which is happening at a state level or at the country level or at the global level. So missions, like whatever you call AI or robotics or machine learning, whatever it is something that you have to deploy, okay, with your customization. Okay, it's a saying like one shoe doesn't fit every size. So you can't have one system which says that okay, it will solve all your problems. So it's very difficult, and you have to use the right tools for the way that what you want. But definitely, the technology is helping a lot and replacing the human elements. Just because earlier we used to run various reports, and we, the finance persons, love to see the Excel templates. As you said, like 5 Excel sheets or 5 Excel files, and then combining each one, and it takes time and it will hang, and then you don't know where you stopped and where you have to start. So now those things have gone. Okay, if someone can predict, to for your question, like okay, my music, suppose how it will predict my sales in the, if someone can develop such a software, yes they can, but the testing has to be done. If someone can develop and understand the logic behind all those stuff, people will go to the stock market. I don't want to do a business, rather I go to market, predict the stock price, and then make money in the market. So it's something that the logic that you have to build in, whether it's an AI or an ML, you have to build in the logic. And that's where the consultants and the, so you need to spell out very clearly what is your requirement. And then with the consultant's help, you can develop, I would say it will be a MVP, like a MVP, minimum viable product. It cannot be 100% sure. It's not like a crystal ball which says, okay, tell me what is my tax liability. To the last digit, it won't tell. So it's something that today these tools are using the time of human and releasing them to do a strategic work, and then look at reading all those. For example, if you look at the OECD manuals, I don't think that anyone can read it within 1 or 2 days. You need to undergo and you a lot of clarifications you need to understand. So today we don't have that time because we do the data mining ourselves. So that the machines are doing now. And with that spare capacity, we can use the human force to go into all these strategic areas. Okay. And one of the things I can quote, since it's been mentioned in Oracles and others, SAP, say one of our customer in Africa runs a telecom company. They used to do like they automated the tax planning and the tax reporting application itself with a cloud. So one advantage of cloud is it's a real time. Anyone can see from anywhere, sitting in India or in the US. If I update, otherwise I need to send my Excel sheet through email or put it in a share space. Somebody opens it. By the time he reviews, I'll be making some changes here. So the real time changes can be seen. And they have done the shorten the reporting cycle and also strengthen the tax provisioning oversight across it's about around 25 operating geographies. And their tax provisioning calculations and their comparisons with the group effective tax rate. Now they are doing monthly, which they have been doing quarterly earlier. So these are something that it will enables you. But if you ask a question whether it will help me and I don't need a team, so it will run my tax department or something, I don't think we are yet there. But all this robotics, AI, and ML helps the tax department, as Dr. Williams said, from a transfer pricing, analyze the data which is available publicly to do that analytics. All this analytics post-mortem, yes, it can do. Predicting is something logic that you have to tell. For example, if you take a liquor company, you say that, okay, next 1 month, I'm going to sell this many liters, and tomorrow there's a lockdown. So all the predictions will go for a toss. So it can't. So unless you put the logic and then given the dictum to the machine, it's not going to give you the output. So whatever you feed in, you're going to get it back.
Yeah, so I am taking a question from our participant, Mr. Andrew Bonnet, who's also an ex-Oracle and now a full-time consultant in tax technology. So he's also talking about garbage in, garbage out, and that is what, if we are mining the data which has not been fed in properly. So now the whole world is talking about digital economy as a B2C, not B2B. Now, if the consensus goes that you have to capture the consumer is flying from one jurisdiction to other jurisdiction. So definitely technology has a role to play if the tax is going to be applied based on where my customer is. So that way, my question to Prabin, because you are saying that GSTN has developed an e-invoicing system wherein and the e-mobility system all are integrated, where the one server will come to know each and every transaction on a real-time basis the way it is happening. That is transaction capturing. But data mining is much beyond that, and the intelligence can be used by the revenue department as well as by the policy makers to make the law which are more conducive for the industry and for them to spend less money in terms of collecting the tax. Because the tax collection per dollar, our cost of collection should be the minimum across the world. If that minimization can happen, of course, simplification is bound to come. So how do you see, and then what is your answer to the attendee, Mr. Andrew? He's saying that, garbage in, garbage out. What happens if in the central server also the data is not reliable? So how to ensure that through automation? So a very complex question, but in simple terms, what do you see as a future of tax data mining going to be?
See, it's a very good question, and thanks to Andrew to raising this kind of a question. So, see, from the tax perspective, whatever the data is being captured, that's the reason that the from the tax authority, how the tax governance mechanism, how the tax policy maker will do, the data capturing should be very well defined. So that's the reason that various kind of returns has been well thought of, given by the policymaker, and that has been designed in the digital format, that in the return this kind of a data field is required and that should be captured. So through that data field, the data mining is being done by the particular system, like in India, GSTN is that data technology center where we do data mining. We have a separate team for that business analytics, data mining and other things. So that do. And I believe that most of the developed country where the digital taxation and they have moved the things into the digital platform, that data mining is there. So the policymaker as well as the taxation authority, whatever decision they need to take based on the various parameters, based on the various filter mechanism, based on the various metrics, this outcome will be beneficial. And with regards to that, when we move into digital, so a lot of tax fraud things, kind of a things has been coming to the notice. And just to add onto this, from GSTN, like there are so many verification kind of a thing. Earlier it was done in a physical form of kind of a thing. So now it is being on a digital, either through Aadhaar verification where the address is being taken up. Now we are doing the things on a taxpayer premises verification through the Google Map and other things. So those kind of a future technology is on pipeline where the various data is being captured in a fruitful way, so that the output, the desired output for the policymaker and for the tax authority to do their homework and their KPA and K kind of a things. So those kind of a thing is being internally designed and developed, and that has been framed into the technological architect.
So now I'll take up the last question. Since the industry view, my next panelists are going to take, and Mateo is waiting, and all the other panelists have arrived. So my question to Mr. Tarun Gulati, that Tarun, since you are handling litigation, and litigation is all about the past data, the crux of the data, and then the court craft to make the judge understand what has gone right or wrong in the past and how the justice need to be delivered by the courts. Now, in this entire process of digital economy taxation, of course, when the consensus will not be there, litigation is bound to be there. We cannot deny when double tax or triple taxation, of course, industry may not agree to it. Now, how digitally equipped our litigation system is, because now I am hearing that most of the courts are now online, and the research work also can be done through artificial intelligence by putting all the tools and technologies. So how do you see the work of a lawyer, a tax litigation lawyer, is going to change worldwide? So that's something everybody would love to know.
We have, there are some, I think, benefits out of every, uncertainty, and this pandemic has shown that while everything was shut down, courts had to function, and we moved to a online hearing system. And having experienced it for the last 3-4 months now, what I personally find is that, well, it's a good system, it's a good start, and it, having made a start, it's going to stay. But it's not a perfect substitute. I think there is no perfect substitute to a physical hearing. Court matters are all about physicality, about having in eye contact with the judge, reading the body language. That's what courtcraft also involves. It's not just that. Now, how courts are going to be, yes, we use a lot of online tools now for research purposes, for filings in court have become online. So all of those are huge gains that we are seeing in the recent past. How courts are going to react to digital tax when there is no consensus is a completely different issue. And there, according to me, in the absence of a multilateral agreement, courts are going to apply the domestic law or the bilateral treaties if they apply. And as I see it, today, if you see the equalization levy, if it were to be challenged in an Indian court, I can tell you that it is most likely to be upheld. If they are not going to strike down the levy, they are going to, they're going to, Parliament's power to impose a new tax is plenary. They are not going to shut out Indian Parliament from levying a new tax by saying that, is it because one of the things that people have talked about is that it's a turnover-based tax. So is it really a tax on income? According to me, it is, because you can have a presumptive basis to tax income. So if that be the situation, then Indian courts are going to uphold the domestic law and I think allow the levy to go on. We have seen how Indian courts have acted in a very robust manner when e-commerce was taxed for the first time, at least on the indirect tax side. You know that in India, on the indirect tax side, on the VAT side at least, it was an origin-based tax. So the origin, where the transaction originates, that state had the right to tax the transaction. And when e-commerce started, all the destination states started feeling the brunt because they were losing tax. They started taxing the e-commerce transactions and the destination tax itself. Indian courts, at least I have appeared in at least 3 high courts in the country where they upheld the right of the origin state according to the stated law. Now that is what is going to pan out in the international taxation realm also. That if there is no multilateral agreement and there is no consensus, the Indian courts will say that if it's a unilateral measure and India has taken it, they will uphold it. That's where I think I see this going.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. And now I'm exhausting the time available, and Mateo and other panelists are waiting. So I will once again give you a vote of thanks. Thanks for giving your precious time to this Global Taxation Summit. And I'm sure that with the technology, with the knowledge, with the wisdom, and some sort of a divine, I would say here, I think taxation is not divine, but in the Egypt, when the pyramid was excavated further, they found 2 things: the sign of life and the sign of taxation. So I think we have a long history of taxation. Death and tax, these are two things we have to live with, whether we like it or not. So in digital world also, we have to face the digital tax systems and we have to digitally adapt to it. Thank you very much for giving your input on technology and service provider views. And we are moving to our next panel now. So I'm really excited to introduce our next panelist, and thank you to all of you. Thank you, Dr. William Barnes, Mr. Tarun Gulati, Mr. Gopala Ramnan, and Mr. Prabin Dokania. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you kindly.
So friends, we are now moving to our panel 3 of the session, and Mr. Mateo Jarrin Cuvi, our content manager, Taxlinked. I just want to introduce the moderator of the panel, and then he will take over and introduce the distinguished panelist of panel 3. He is a writer, journalist, digital marketeer, and researcher from Ecuador who currently resides in Nicosia, Cyprus. He is driven by meticulous, dependable, highly organized individual passionate about and journalism. Copywriting, editing, developing, coordinating weekly newsletter, blog posts, interviews, co-managing the social media accounts, and building the links via content outreach. He's an exceptional professional with inclination towards international taxation, and we are glad to have him on the panel as a moderator. Over to you, Mr. Mateo, to introduce the other panelists of this panel talking about the industry.
Thank you very much, Rishabh, for your kind words and your introduction. Are we all here? I don't, let me see. I think we're missing one person.
Yeah, so I will request all the panelists to put their video on.
Yes, we're missing Mr. Ramesh.
Yes.
Just before we get started, just make sure we're all here. I'm asking them to start the video. Let's see. Anyway, well, since we're running 5 minutes late, I'll get started. And once Mr. Ramesh can join us, there he is. Hello. Now we're all here. Excellent. Okay, it's a pleasure having all of you here with us this afternoon, morning in the US and Latin America and whatnot. I do things a little bit differently. I'm going to ask each one of you to briefly introduce yourselves, give us, a very quick bio as to who you are and what you do, what is your expertise, etc. And then we'll jump into the 4 questions that we have here with us right now. So as it's on the screen, Mr. Mukesh Bhutani, would you like to give us a quick introduction?
Hi, Matthew. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. I am the founder and managing partner of BMR Legal, which is a boutique law firm that focuses on corporate international transfer pricing and related expert witness work. We as a firm are known for doing advisory, advocacy, and dispute resolution in the courts and in alternate dispute resolution platforms, which are starting from bilateral investment treaty to the mutual agreement procedure and to the bilateral APAs. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Glad to have you with us. An old friend of ours from Taxlinked, Dr. Peter Wilson.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm Peter Wilson. I'm an international tax advisor. I currently am based in Dubai, and I advise multinational companies, high net worth individuals, governments, and I help them on their cross-border tax problems. I help them in resolving taxation disputes, and I help them with a little bit of advanced thinking, foresight as to maybe how they should organize themselves so they don't end up having a problem.
Thank you, Peter. Next up, we have Mr. Ramesh Kaitan.
Hi, this is Ramesh Kaitan. I'm Global Head of Tax in Lupin, and I have done my BCom Honors LLB from Calcutta University and Bar at Law from Calcutta University. I'm also a company secretary. Before, I have been looking after heading the tax function of Lupin for last 23 years. Before that, I was heading the tax function of ISPAD, earlier known as LN Mittal Group. And recently, I have been awarded as in-house tax director of the year, that is 2020 by ITR. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Ramesh. Last but not least, Ms. Astha Jain.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Astha Jain. I'm a chartered accountant, and I have also done company secretaryship and masters in finance from Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. And I'm a partner with Messrs. Vinod Kumar and Associates, which is a chartered accountant firm. And I've been working in this firm from last 9 years. Before that, I did my training with Deloitte Huskins and Sells for 3 years. Our firm specializes in auditing, direct and international taxation, and advises clients on all complex matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started. I have 4 questions here, and basically the way we're going to do this is it's going to be a collaborative effort. We have 4 questions. I'm going to toss a question to each one of you, and you can each comment on what has been said by others, etc. To get started and kind of, this is of course, this panel is on the perspective from industry. We're talking about financial service providers. We're talking about people who work with large multinational companies, etc., and how they are dealing with, these proposals by the OECD in terms of the taxation of the digital economy. So just to kind of set the stage, let me give you a very general kind of open-ended question. And we could start with Mr. Mukesh, who could get us started with this one. But basically the question is, as someone working in the industry or as a financial service provider, what are your general thoughts on the recently issued draft proposal? So we're talking about pillars 1 and 2 by the OECD looking to set up a global system for the taxation of the digital economy. So this is an open-ended question. Tell us your opinions. What do you think? What's right? What's wrong? Etc. And we'll take it from there. Go ahead, Mr. Mukesh.
Yeah, since I was there in the last session, the entire part of last session and part of the session before that, I'm going to be mindful that I don't land up repeating anything that was said earlier. But just to set the context, I think we all know the challenges for digital taxation, which is firstly consensus-based, and the consensus-based is on one part, which is how do you really allocate profits to market jurisdictions, which is really the bone of contention. Having said that, I think, that's like oversimplifying the matter. I did hear some comments in the past on making out a case for levying a withholding tax or some form of an indirect tax. I think that's fundamentally incorrect because it militates against the principles of taxation, because you really levy tax on profits and you don't levy tax on income, because if you levy tax on income, that's more of a transaction tax than an income tax. So that's one important part of it. Now, what is really preventing us from achieving the consensus? I think a lot was spoken about in the earlier session as to the alternatives for till the time we achieve a consensus, which is unilateral levy, which is the DST levies in the European Union, or an equivalent of that, which is equalization levy. But let's come back to what the issue is there in us. I think whatever is the consensus or no consensus, or for a matter, if equalization levy or the equivalent of DST continues, what's important is to strike a balance between the most fundamental principles of taxation, which is one, keep the compliance and the administrative burden in mind and ensure that taxpayers fulfill the obligation. Now, this is again easy said than done, because you're really dealing with a situation where the degree of sophistication of tax administrations vary from nation to nation. And in an inclusive framework, the consensus approach that the OECD is trying to achieve is indeed a very, very difficult task. Let me come to your direct question on financial services. Well, I must confess that, Mateo, I'm not a financial services person per se, I did work in a consulting environment because my first 18 years of my career were in a big four firm, and a big four firm that had a lot of orientation for financial services, because the definition can be very loose. But if you simply look at what definition has been given by the OECD, is that financial services will encompass primarily three forms of businesses: banking, insurance, and asset management company. And I am not an expert in either of those. But I will try and articulate what are the unique features of financial services. Number one, the customers. The customers typically choose the place they wanted to be serving, and hence there is no dispute insofar as the jurisdiction is concerned, which is a challenge that you have in the traditional form of digital businesses. Number two, there are new technologies like blockchain and artificial intelligence that has not just brought technology to our doorstep, but it has brought the larger ambit of financial services also to our doorstep, whether it's insurance, banking, or asset management. And then the fairness and flexibility of the system, and how do you appropriately allocate the cost. Now, these are very, very specific aspects, not in relation to financial services, but in all forms of digital services. However, when you step on the financial services, you have three, four important factors. Number one, that regulations essentially drive financial institutions, and they are the most regulated businesses. Now, what does that mean? If a business is very regulated, which is unlike the other forms of digital services such as e-commerce or such as providing services through the digital platform. So what does financial services entail? Number one, because it is regulated in various markets, the importance of marketplace, the importance of user participation, which is a bone of contention under the pillar one, to a larger extent gets neutralized. That's the first unique feature. The second unique feature is that there are very strict rules of conduct and very strict limitations for financial services. More importantly, these restrictions are on all forms of products and services. So a bank cannot offer you, or a financial institution cannot offer you a service which is not regulated. I'll come to the unregulated part of the business as well, because as with the growth of artificial intelligence, the financial services is also stepping on some of the unregulated businesses as well. The third important aspect is that the financial services often bear significant risk. So let me give you a very simplistic example. The capitalization norms for banks, insurance companies, and asset management companies are very, very stringent. And they essentially are comprising of a major risk that a financial services undertake. Finally, the regulated nature of the financial services also means that their activities are largely localized, something sometime already reflected in the unique treatment of how a typical bank gets treated. Of course, there are concerns in the unregulated part of the businesses, and whether unregulated part of the businesses do in fact create a value. I was looking at today's Economic Times headline, and this is the headline for Economic Times. It says, Jack Ma creates a 290 billion loan machine in changing the Chinese banking system. And I'll just give you a brief background what it is. This is Jack Ma's now baby. It's called My Bank. The My Bank so far has lent 2 trillion yuan, which is equivalent to the $290 billion, to 16 million small companies in China, which is the growth engine. And all of these loans are transacted through smartphones. You can imagine a $13 trillion economy in China, what it would entail. Now, this is unregulated, but regulations are stepping in this part of the financial services. But bear in mind that these regulations are very, very country specific, and hence they cannot be equated, because over a period of time, you will see this part of the business getting regulated, and hence you will see the implications of pillar one and pillar two. I'm not going to repeat what was talked about earlier in terms of challenges of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, but I'm going to focus largely on the banking and financial services. Let me pause over here, but before I do that, I just wanted to make 2-3 points again, which are very specific to financial services. Number one, customers in financial service often tend to make decisions based on criteria such as availability of retail branches, what kind of fees are charged, what kind of track record of investments that a particular fund has. So unlike in a classic digital services, these challenges are largely absent in financial services, unless and until you get into an example that I spoke about in the context of Jack Ma's new business model called My Bank. More importantly, and I will talk about it later, there are specific carve-outs that have been worked out by the OECD for financial services. But let me pause over here and we can take it up in the next round to see what are those specific carve-outs for the financial services industry, and where do I see the shape of regulations insofar as Pillar 1, Pillar 2 debate is concerned, and more importantly, how it will impact the larger banking and financial services company.
Thank you, Mukesh. Peter, do you want to share your comments with us on Pillars 1, Pillars 2? What are your thoughts on those, on the draft proposal, I guess?
Thank you very much, Mateo. This is such a complex and difficult target and topic. I have experience advising financial institutions, whether it be insurance companies, whether it be banks, whether it be administrators. And my experience at the moment is that insurance companies and asset management companies are not totally integrated. There is still a substantial amount of human intervention in what they do. So I'm not sure at the moment to the extent to which they're really going to be caught by having to calculate an amount A in Pillar 1. Financial institutions that provide financial accounts or business transactions, that's a different story. I think the problem of the complexity will be partly solved by the number one, the carve out. The first carve out is that you don't even get into the tasks until you have a turnover of in excess of 750 million euros. I personally think that turnover is too low, simply because of the complexity and the functionality required to calculate the amount A, or the A amount, and then to allocate that A amount across the various jurisdictions. So I think that the 750 million, yes, it's come from the country by country reporting, and I think that's a good place to start. But I think that's going to have to go up by leaps and bounds. The next thing is, and I wasn't unfortunately able to attend the earliest sessions to know exactly what software there is out there, pardon me, or maybe out there to do these calculations. But I think the calculation is going to be really interesting, number one. Number two, what's really interesting is to determine what a normal profit amount will be. And thirdly, a lot of these large financial institutions, and I advise one, who has a consolidated operating loss, yet has substantial EBITDA, substantial net EBITDA. I'm just wondering, when the regulators and the tax authorities look at the financial accounts and see a loss, how they're going to scratch their heads to work out how they should be allocating that loss around. Now, I know that the losses can get carried forward from one year to the next. I know that, but I'm just wondering whether the authorities might have missed something here, and that is maybe they should be calculating these taxes by reference to EBITDA of these organizations rather than net profits. So my take really on pillar 2, and I think I've said this to you previously, Mateo, is that the OECD did a great job in the action reports and subsequent work to tell taxpayers of the world how they needed to organize themselves so the tax authorities of the world couldn't touch them. And then when they realized that they'd written a blueprint for everybody to be able to keep themselves away from the tax authorities, they decided that they better do something about that. And that's the pillar 2. And the pillar 2 has got problems all the way through it. And it's including things like, you know, there are some countries that have taxes that aren't really taxes. And I've spent a bit of time recently looking at the zakat in Saudi Arabia. Now, I know the zakat in Saudi Arabia gets specific mention in pillar 2, but, you know, when you're looking at a country that imposes no or nearly no tax, or a country that has a tax rate less than the magical minimum rate that we're not quite sure what's going to be there. But if there are stipends that are being paid to the government that walk and talk like a tax, but have a name that's not a tax, I'm not sure whether the OECD has found a way to properly deal with those yet. So my take on the whole thing is, yes, I think it's an inevitability that there will be a pillar 1 and a pillar 2. I think that the feasibility of consensus on pillar 1, in my bones, I feel it's less likely than the feasibility of consensus in pillar 2. I think that gap can be bridged by increasing the threshold for pillar 1, which means that there would be fewer multinationals that it would apply to, which means that there would be fewer countries that broadly it would be applicable for, meaning that there would need to be consensus among fewer people. And as for pillar 2, I think it's just a massive overreach on the sovereign rights of sovereign nations to charge their own, or to establish their own taxation systems, especially after forcing a wide range of maybe 15, 20 countries to have specific economic substance rules to make sure they don't get on the blacklist of the European Union. For them to be forced to do all that, and then for a tax to effectively be imposed on them in pillar 2, I think is a bit rich. I think in the end, those countries will end up establishing their own corporate tax rate, corporate tax rules. But I think though they will probably bring their corporate tax rules in on a territorial basis, and there'll be room in the territorial basis to slip and slide around pillar 2, I believe.
Thank you, Peter. Ms. Asta Jain, some thoughts on pillars 1, pillar 2? Anything to add?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the OECD has issued the blueprints of pillar 1 and pillar 2, which all of us are talking 2 weeks ago. And basically the pillar 1 has introduced the concept of a 3-tier profit allocation mechanism, which has been defined as amount A and amount B, and there's an amount C also, which actually reallocates profit to the market jurisdictions. And the purpose of this rebalancing the allocation of profits worldwide. So the main challenge operationally is to arrive at amount A is a big challenge, I feel so. And there's a fear that a structure will become more complex, and the countries already have a TP system in place. And the introduction of this new calculation in this pillar approach will make it more complex. Moreover, the implementation and the computation under the pillar approach would be a big challenge for the business houses. And this will increase the cost of businesses as one would need more resources internally as well as externally. There will be a need of a lot of professional advisors for the business houses. And I feel that the result may be more outsourcing because of the difficulty of adjusting to the new profit allocation rules. And the taxpayers will be left with no option, but they will be more dependent on the outside advisors to manage risks and prevent disputes. Moreover, the structure has been, I feel that the structure has been too complex, and it will lead to more controversy, a lot of litigation in each country. That's what my views are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Finally, Mr. Ramesh, some thoughts on what we have been discussing?
Thank you. The problem, I would just talk more from outbound perspective because we are Indian multinational company. So the thing is that if I am selling the goods as a manufacturer, I'm selling the goods to a B2B, then Pillar 1 is not applicable. When I sell the goods, means the company in India, the Indian company sells the goods in US, and the US company acts as a normal risk distributor or limited risk distributor. In that case, amount B actually it is basically it's easy to calculate the return based on the arm's length principle. But what happens if amount A is involved, because then it talks about the return or nexus to the market, and that there is no threshold, no percentage, nothing has been so far defined. So if I'm compensating, the Indian company is compensating its subsidiary or normal risk distributor or low risk distributor at arm's length margin, then there should not be further attribution to the market. So because if that is being case, then if the treaty is not amended, then there would be double taxation, double whammy in the hands of the company. Second thing, when you have now with various intermediate holding companies where you get dividend income, and dividend income under, say, the treaty between the intermediate holding company and the investee country of the investee company is tax-free. And it is also tax-free in the investor company's jurisdiction. Then the amount will get taxed under IIR and in the hands of the ultimate parent company. So it will, though it allows for carry forward of tax credit, etc., when there is tax, it meets the IR line that is what the IIR is not yet been prescribed. So that's one challenge. So one need lot of will look for restructuring their investment holding companies, etc. That will cause. And second thing is when you have companies which have carry forward losses. Now the rule Pillar 2 does not address. It addresses about the losses which have been incurred after Pillar 1, Pillar 2 comes. It allocates to the losses to the segment only, and set of losses would be from that segment only. And though the losses will be allowed to be set off as per the country of the country of the residence, domestic tax laws. So what happens in that case if the country, say the company is in US, it has losses and it doesn't pay any tax? In that case, whether IIR will be applied in the hands of the ultimate parent company, which is Indian company. I didn't find any solution or any example on this aspect in Pillar 2. And second thing is that India has certain treaties in which the PE income is exempted. So India doesn't, the Indian parent company has a PE, say in a country with which it has exemption rule. So the PE will not, India will not tax the PE profits. So now under the subject to tax rule, in switchover rule, it has to be from exemption method, it has to switch over to the credit method, and it requires amendment of Article 23. If Article 23 is not amended, then what will be the position? So these are the challenges, and then there are a lot of related party transactions which may suffer if they are under tax payment rules. Then under tax payment rules, then there may be and the company to whom the payment is made in a jurisdiction which is low IR jurisdiction, there could be disallowance, or it may get taxed in the hands of the ultimate parent company. So these are the issues will require a lot of evaluation and study, and it will create more compliance burden and extra efforts in the hands of the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Marvesh. Okay, so we've basically discussed. Yes, go ahead, Peter. You have a comment? Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. And that I'm struggling to see whether Pillar 1 is really going to act as a disincentive to entrepreneurship. In other words, do we think Microsoft would have been able to develop the way it has developed if there was essentially a tax on excess profits? You know, do we think that Elon Musk would have been able to get the money to invest in doing what he's doing if there was a tax on excess profits? I'm just wondering whether maybe there might be some more fairness in Pillar 1 if the charge aid had no relevance at all until there was a function of 100% of the capital investment recovered. So let's say a company spends 10 billion or 20 billion developing something that subsequently produces an exceptional profit. Would it be a better way of dealing with this to allow that company to recover its risk capital before it started to have an obligation to pay tax? I know, having looked at some offshore petroleum tax systems in the past, that some of these secondary petroleum tax regimes recognize the inherent risk in spending money on exploration, and they allow 100% of all the exploration costs and some of the development costs to be fully written off before the secondary tax is charged. So maybe I don't fully understand Pillar 1 yet, and I think that's probably true. But if there isn't, if the way that it's drafted at the moment is going to act as a disincentive for businesses to take risk, is that in the end in the best interests of the world economy?
It's a good question. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Second thing, I have personally doubts about that the Pillar 1 amount A would be, there will be consensus on amount A, because it travels far beyond the sovereign rights to tax, and it travels beyond what is the routine profits and non-routine profits. So if you have to compensate additionally more than the non-routine profits, then there would be problems. Second thing, when there is no consensus, each country is bringing their own laws, like digital tax service, or like India, market-based approach. It has brought in significant economic presence. and then equalization levy. So though OECD is talking that there would be a consensus and they will come out with the final paper in mid-July 21 on both on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. The tax seems to be very difficult and
Thank you. Any other comments on Peter's question?
I just wanted to react to Peter's observation.
Yep.
And he gave two examples of one, the digital model, citing Microsoft and Elon Musk's car, and also the extractive industry, which is what we call it as the hydrocarbons industry. The challenge with the entire OECD-led BEPS exercise has been that the political motivation driving such an exercise and an implicit assumption being made that technology companies are not paying their fair share of taxes. So Peter, to your examples in an extractive industry, you're absolutely correct. The oil and gas sector, which comes from a typical classic brick and mortar model, does not pay tax up until the time all the exploration and development costs are written off. As a matter of fact, the very basis of a production sharing contract provides for these situations. But when after those costs are written off and you have profit oil, which is integral to a classic production sharing contract, you start paying taxes. And the moment your oil prices spike up, you start paying taxes on super profits. That's how you build the reserves, and those reserves then in turn go to make investment in other exploration properties which have the potential of producing hydrocarbons. With respect to technology, many of those assumptions do not necessarily hold true. Number one, the cash, the amount of reserves that profitable companies are sitting on are humongous. And the assumption is that, well, these cash reserves did not suffer the right rate of taxes. Now, how fair it is now for the world to come back and start thinking about taxing those profits in 2015, 2020 is, in my view, a subject matter of debate. The other debate is that there are many of these digital models that don't even have the cash. And that cash is actually that of investors, whether they are private equity guys or strategic investors or promoters. I think clearly in those cases, a case is made out not to tax. So I think there is a fundamental shift as we move into the digital economy and the basis of taxation. Having said that, I wanted to support it by saying that if you simply look at the Pillar 1 exclusion of the scope from amount A, which is what Astha referred to as the amount that begs for a determination and which uses the user base as an important yardstick for determination of amount A, it very clearly says that certain parts of the financial services sector, which is the classic brick and mortar banks, asset management and insurance companies, natural resources companies, construction companies, sale and leasing of residential property are clearly excluded. I think the exercise on digital taxation has been driven largely with one, a political mandate, two, an assumption that these companies never paid their fair share of taxes, and three, there is something unique in this forms of business model which helps them churn out their cash registers without having presence. In my view, even if the debate on what to tax and when to tax settles down, the larger debate would be how do you now allocate these profits in across jurisdictions. And that's also the reason why a debate or academic debate on third pillar is gaining prominence, which is that let's have a worldwide taxation system. Now, the worldwide taxation system need not necessarily be the global formulatory approach, but it could be applied on certain scientific basis. You could use the arm's length principle to tax the multinational problems and allocate it across jurisdictions, because the arm's length principle has been sharpened significantly in the last 2 decades. And what used to be in the last, a couple of decades back, where only 1/4 of the global economies were covered under domestic transfer pricing laws, is not necessarily true. So today, 3/4 of the world economies are covered under the transfer pricing laws. Of course, the level of sophistication depends from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but the fact is that we have an arm's length standard. The arm's length standard can be applied to a significant part of the profits. If that happens, then you would perhaps not be so overwhelmed with the user database, because what you earn from a user in India could be a fraction from what the multinational enterprise earns from a user outside of India. A classic example is the revenue per subscriber, a very important yardstick for a telecom industry. China is 5 times of India in terms of revenue per subscriber. United States is about 12 times. Certain countries in Scandinavia are 25 times. So for every dollar that a telecom company earns in India, 25 times is earned by a Scandinavia, 17 times by the United States, and 5 times by China. This explains the anomaly that if you use user-based participation as a yardstick for allocating the amount A, which is the bone of contention under Pillar 1, then that may not necessarily be the right and the most logical approach to move forward. Certainly not for a country like India.
Thank you, Mukesh. This is a good segue, I guess, into our next question. It's basically like, moving forward or looking towards the future, like how would you actually potentially improve the OECD's plan, or what would an ideal system to tax the digital economy look like, in your opinion, as a financial service provider or someone who works in industry? Asta, you want to give us your opinion? How would that model look? Like an ideal system to tax the digital economy?
Yeah, thank you. So currently, in my view, the structure which has been proposed in the OECD plan is overly complex. And I propose that it is important to introduce a simple system based on gross revenue received by a digital service provider or an e-commerce company from a particular jurisdiction. OECD can determine a maximum percentage of gross revenue, which can be deemed as income by a source country, and accordingly tax the same. Say, for example, 5% of the gross revenue, just for an example. And now each jurisdiction will be free to determine an appropriate percentage of gross revenue as net taxable profit in respect of different services and collect tax accordingly. And this gross revenue threshold chargeable for taxation can be left to be decided by respective source country from where the revenue is getting generated. Currently, recommended group revenue threshold under Pillar 2 is exorbitantly high. And I feel that there are a lot of companies who would not be covered by the current tax system because the limit is too high. For example, if a company does a consolidation, normally the revenue of the subsidiaries are included in the consolidated group balance sheet. However, the revenue of the associates, the joint ventures, the step-down companies and other related parties, if you see the definition of Section 188 of the Companies Act, and for that matter, 92E of the Income Tax Act, the definition of related parties is vast. And the revenue of those companies is not included when we prepare the consolidated financial statements at the group level. So those companies will not be ever brought into taxation when, if I look into the current system of OECD guidelines. And to avoid double taxation, the source country will charge the aforesaid tax or the tax payable on the arm's length principle, whichever is higher. And the tax paid in the source country can be allowed to be adjusted against the tax liability in the country where the rest of the profit is getting taxed. So that's what my suggestion is, because I feel that the current system, which is included in the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 approach, is very complex. and it will be very difficult for all the jurisdictions to implement the same. And at the same time, we also don't want that there's too much litigation which results after the implementation of these guidelines.
Thank you. Peter, what are your thoughts on this ideal model? I know we've discussed a bit of it, but.
Okay, my views are quite simplistic. In Pillar 1, yes, you can have an amount A and B, but there shouldn't be any commencement of a calculation until the enterprise has fully recovered their historical costs plus an interest rate. That's number one. And if that was allowed in Pillar 1, I would go along with Pillar 1. Yes, there are very difficult issues to work out how to allocate the excess profit amongst the various countries. That's Pillar 1. In Pillar 2, I would provide a carve-out for any additional tax income inclusion rule or what have you in Pillar 2, if the recipient of the fee or the income is able to evidence that in the country where it's providing the service or deriving the fee or the interest meets an economic substance test. I mean, I've seen it in my professional life that a company can be based in a so-called tax haven and have 300, 400, 500 people there actually providing the services that are deriving the income. And I just fail to grasp the intellectual argument that if there is employment and if there is investment, and if there is a return coming from that employment investment, why should there be a tax imposed on that if in the jurisdiction where that investment sits and the jurisdiction where the employees sit, however way you want to do it, there isn't a tax, or there is a low tax. I currently advise a number of companies who companies with 5,000 employees that happen to be headquartered on an island, and they have 500 people down there. I happen to advise a company that employs 500 people in another island that's a worldwide headquarters of a gambling company. I don't understand. I do understand why we're going away from the substance test, and you see it almost in the first page of the executive summary of both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and that's the government shortage of cash. And COVID-19 has exacerbated the problem, and the BEPS original action reports grew out of government shortage of revenue. It's all about the growth of industry moving away from 19th century and 20th century jurisdictions that generated the wealth to businesses being translocated or transferred or established somewhere else. And the jurisdictions that traditionally had the taxing base are losing that taxing base and wanting to do something about it. I just think it's intellectually immoral to impose a tax on a corporation that meets certain tests on economic substance, and I also believe it's immoral to impose a Pillar 1 tax on a company until it's totally recovered all its investment with an appropriate economic return.
Thank you, Peter. Mr. Ramesh, your thoughts on this ideal system or ideal model that we're discussing?
See, because of there are certain countries like Netherlands, Luxembourg, UK, US, and recently Switzerland, they allow patent box income from patent box regime, and because of their domestic tax laws, the tax rate is very low. In US, it comes to around 13.5% or 13%. In Netherlands, it's come to 5%. So in a way, this Pillar 2 takes away the sovereign rights of the state. So this is the sovereign right. So how it can take away? Second thing, it imposes additional burden on at the parent entity level, additional tax outgo. So when a tax, some deductions are allowed, so they should not be disturbed by bringing global anti-based erosion rules, because these are targeted only for the companies which are housed in low tax jurisdiction or tax havens. So in that case, it should not be. And then the minimum level of effective taxation should not be more than 10%, though it is not defined. So it will take care of lot of complications. And then there should be carve-outs for certain taxpayers. And the determination of amount A has to be more practical. And then there should be tax certainty measures. So now nothing is provided. Tax certainty measures would be through bilateral APAs or unilateral bilateral APA treaty mechanism, or through arbitration, because India is not agreeing to arbitration in its mode in MLI. So there is going to be a lot of challenges ahead.
Thank you. We have about 5. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Just one more question. I made the point earlier on that the developed world just told everybody how they needed to structure themselves in other countries to avoid the tax man coming. I put it to you, and I'm seriously making this point, that when Pillar 2 minimum tax rate comes out at, say, 10%, for example, if it's 10%, why wouldn't you expect to see all the countries in the world that currently don't impose any tax whatsoever, all imposing a tax at 10%? And countries that impose taxes at greatly in excess of 10%, they're going to lose even more business, because I can imagine that places like the Seychelles, Mauritius, Bermuda, all these places that have got great pools of talent, that they're going to be just invaded by companies that are going to, hire loads of staff, because they now then know that they can do their business there in the way they want to do the business, pay 10% tax in, say, the Seychelles, and there's nothing that, say, UK could do on a payment coming out of the UK to the Seychelles, because it meets the minimum tax rate. So in that illustration, what does the UK have to do? Does it then have to reduce its tax rate from 19% down to 10% to try and attract the companies and the staff back to the UK? I think that the OECD is creating its own race to the bottom here by looking at establishing a minimum tax rate.
Now, what I mean to say that even after considering a lot of deductions, exemptions, etc., provided by the domestic tax laws, if the effective tax rate comes to below to 10%, then these provisions, globe rules should be applied. Otherwise, it should not be applied. But why should it be applied? The exemptions, etc., are being granted under the domestic tax laws, because if I happen to be, when a company happens to be in US, where the head rate, corporate tax rate is 21%, but because of various deductions like your R&D tax credit, and your foreign investment, IP income, etc., if your tax rate falls, effective tax rate falls below 10%, in that case, Pillar 2 should not be invoked.
Anyone else on Peter's comment?
So I think I largely laid out the basis for how the Pillar 1 discussions can be sharpened. I think the important event to watch out would be the outcome of the US elections. I think US would be back on the table for negotiation, and it will set in motion a time-bound process. I also feel that the blueprint for Pillar 1 that was released is a fairly decent articulation of what are the points of convergence and what are the points of divergence. I also agree with the larger sentiments being echoed that Pillar 2 globe proposals at this point in time seem distant. It will require a whole lot of persuasion for countries to adopt Pillar 2, because is predicated on an anti-avoidance measure. Countries such as United States and many developed countries where tax administrations are very, very sophisticated and tax planning has been frowned upon, not just by the civil society, but even the courts have had the opportunity to deal with those situations, are in a better position to deal with an anti-erosion basis, which is the foundation for Pillar 2 globe proposals. So I think we need to wait for Pillar 1 to sharpen. Whereas I believe in the simplicity part of it, but I'm not a votary of the gross basis of taxation, no matter how it sounds simple and easy to administer. Because it militates, as I had mentioned, against the fundamental principles of taxation, which is that you tax income, that you tax profits. So I think the challenge for the world economies is how do you allocate on a fair basis? To the point that Peter was making earlier, I have also been a very strong supporter of moderate rates of tax, but will the world move to a moderate rate of tax of 10%? Unlikely in the scenario we are in. Number two, will some countries have those moderate rates of tax and compel some of the businesses to move their operations? Could be, but in small numbers. I think that the answer to all of these questions really lie in tax being a sovereign subject. One of the reasons this debate has gathered so much momentum and heat is because every nation says taxing citizens is my sovereign right, and I do not want any multilateral agency, no matter how strong it is, to come and tell me what should be the basis of taxation. Of course, there are exclusions to those rules. So if you look at the European Union, the CCTB, which is the combined corporate tax profit rate base, is very different. But I can't see a situation where there would be a standard rate of tax. We all know that even in the context of VAT or GST, the rates vary from 5 to 7% in countries such as Singapore to Thailand to the mid-20s in many of the Scandinavia, and settling between 17 and 18% in major parts of continental Europe. I see the debate on corporate rate of taxation continuing, and hence the debate on allocation of profits to jurisdictions in the context of digital is unlikely to go away.
Thank you very much, Mukesh. I think that brings us to a wrap. We've run out of time. So I want to call Rishabh to join us once again to wrap up our summit. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you, Asta. And thank you, Mukesh, for participating in this panel. I think it was very, very insightful. And I think it provides a good wrap to what has been a good 3-hour session on the taxation of the digital economy. Rishabh is around. He wants to say a few words to send us off. Let me try to find him. There he is.
Yeah. I'm here. I just put myself on. Thank you very much to all the participants, all the expert panelists to deal with this complex subject. I'm sure, Mateo, you will find it more interesting day by day, because I was just talking to one of the panelists. He says that, I am watching entertainment from all over the world and paid music streaming, but he is not sure which country the taxes is being paid. And he asked me that, can anyone tell? I said, no, it is just a guesswork, but we don't know, because in the maze, as Mukesh said, that, presence, business without presence. I think digital economy is known for business without any presence in any other country. We can do the business today, but the way digital economy is expanding, and I was reading through the data that 130% growth in education, healthcare, gaming, lottery, entertainment, all sort of businesses are booming in digital economy. Consumption is happening, but it is happening digitally. It is not happening physically. People are paying, but they are paying digitally. So there is a need to have a consensus as soon as possible to avoid the unilateralism, to avoid the double taxation, and to avoid the litigation. That's a wish list by everyone. But thank you all the visionary tax thought leaders like Mukesh Bhutani, Dr. Peter Wilson, Mr. Ramesh Khetan, Astha Jain, to give the industry perspective, the financial services perspective, and also their experience globally, because they are all global leaders. And thank you, Mateo, to conduct this. And I thank all the listeners on the YouTube and also the participant and panelists for attending this Global Tax Summit. And I hope that your feedback will motivate us to do some more detailed one in the future, because this issue is not going to settle here, but it will take time. It will take technology intervention also. The way like Uber, one app, you go anywhere, you get your taxi. Similarly, if is there any one app which Gopal Ramanan can say that if some app can be developed that you go in any jurisdiction, do business without presence or with presence, your taxation will be certainly carved out, calculated, so that as a CFO, you are not struggling with thousands of Excel sheets with hundreds of jurisdiction. So I think that's really challenge. And I'm sure in the time, I will now request a formal vote of thanks by Mr. Sridhar R. Sridhar. Is a veteran of tax systems and very much renowned, well known in our country, wherein he has seen the 3 generation of tax, and he has been my boss, my guru. And now the 4th generation, which is a 5G of digital taxation. So he's the person who has seen the evolution. So I will request him for a formal vote of thanks to all our panelists. Sridhar sir, you have to put your video on, sir. He's right now in Manipal. His daughter is serving the extremely critical COVID patients there, and he is supporting her daughter in this tough time. And I'm sure the health workers are taking care of the world in this tough time. And as a parent, he is taking care of a daughter. Sridhar sir, are you there? I think we are. So, yeah, he has joined. Sir, you have to, yeah. Please, sir. We can listen to you.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I don't know whether my voice is able to come through. I am in a distant location which is badly connected. Sir. I must say so. The session I was going on and off because of the video, but I really enjoyed it, and I must thank all the entire panel, and starting with Mateo and Mukesh, Asta, Dr. Peter, Ramesh Kaitan, and Mr. Gopal Ramanan. I must say, this has been a very enriching 3 sessions. The first 2 sessions we were able to go through on time, though there was about 5 minutes delay in the second session, which I think we couldn't avoid because of connection problems. Anyhow, I think this is a real great effort from us from 6:30 to 9:30, and hope the entire audience would have enjoyed it. But we didn't have, though I seen many number of questions in the second session, we couldn't take many of them, but we'll try to match up maybe perhaps in the future with all the questions answered. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your time. And we wish to have you soon, often, in this private group session, as well as the global tax summit. Thanks, Mateo. Thanks, Shailendra ji.
Thank you, Rishabh. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And have a nice
Have
day.
a good evening.